All yours, Jody.
Good morning, and welcome to the JEA Board meeting. I'm Jody Brooks. I'm with the Office of General Counsel and the Chief Legal Officer for JEA. I'm going to start off this meeting. This is JEA Board meeting of Tuesday, April 28th at 9 o'clock is being conducted via Webex pursuant to Florida Executive Order 2069 and the Emergency Management COVID-19 Local Government Public Meeting. This meeting is permitted to be conducted by Communications Media Technology. And at this time, I'd like Sean Eads to just give us a quick overview of the Webex technology we're using today for this meeting in accordance with the executive order.
Good morning, everyone. I appreciate you joining and working through these times with us with the technology that we have at our hands. Just a brief, what will be very, very important in this meeting is that we maintain your line being muted until it is your turn to speak. For those that are using the Webex client or the web browser, you'll be able to scroll onto your screen and you'll see a series of buttons at the bottom. The far left looks like a microphone. It is currently red for the vast majority of you, which means you are muted. You'll touch that to unmute yourself when it is your turn to speak. And I ask that you continue to leave yourself muted when you're not speaking so we can eliminate background noise. I do have the ability, if I see something, to be able to mute someone, but obviously I only want to do that in case we need to. If you happen to be on a mobile device, it'll be the same. You'll touch the screen and there'll be a similar icon that you can touch to mute yourself through the Webex client or through the Webex technology. I don't recommend muting your phone directly because you'll run into a problem I did 5 minutes ago where you unmute one part and still can't talk. As we also go through, I do have, like I said, the ability to mute folks. I think that will be self-explanatory. If you need to see the list of participants in the meeting, you can scroll on the screen, and about the fourth one from the left looks like a little person. If you click on that, it will bring up an entire list of those that are here through the Webex. There are also people that are streaming this via our Facebook and our website. Should there be any technical difficulties, there were numbers in which you can contact, and we will do the best that we can. Thanks, Jody.
Great. Thanks, Sean. As this is the first meeting of this board, all 7 board members are new. I'd like to recognize and do a really quick roll call of each of the board members. If you just say here when I call your name, that'd be great. John Baker.
Here.
Joe DeSanto.
Here.
Dr. Faison. Dr. Faison.
Here.
Dr. Haley.
Here.
Marty Lanahan.
Here.
Bobby Stein.
Here.
And Tom Van Osdal.
Here.
All right, we've got all 7 of the board members present at the meeting. Thanks so much. As an organizational matter, you don't have a chairman as of yet. We're going to use Robert's Rules of Order to get a chair set and let the chair then conduct the rest of the meeting. But I'm going to walk you through getting a chairman. As from an organizational perspective, I'd like to determine whether or not I'd like to call someone to nominate a chairman for the board. Would someone like to nominate a chairman of the 7 members?
I'd like to nominate.
Mr. Stein, floor.
I'd like to nominate as well.
Okay, so
Dr. Faison after Mr. Stein.
in these turbulent times of the coronavirus and with the events of the last 2 years involving JEA, we need a strong, experienced, principled leader at the helm. It will take uncommon and extraordinary leadership to bring back the engine of JEA to engender a positive impact on our great city. Such a man is John Baker. When I was chairman of the JEA Board, we faced many difficult challenges. For example, we invested $500 million 20 years ago in Brandy Branch natural gas plant when gas prices were $6 an MCF, which they are today $1.70, and no one knew what the outcome would be. I feel John Baker can help us navigate Plant Vogtle issue, which is another similar challenge we are facing today. Another example, 20 years ago, we started the Energy Authority, which is a collection of municipal utilities coming together to trade electrons. The general opinion was to put the authority headquarters in either Houston or Atlanta. We did what it took to bring it to Jacksonville. Today, our city is facing the most difficult economic challenges, and the leadership of John Baker through the JEA will be the driver to help the community flourish economically once again. So who is John Baker? I've known John for many years. As everyone knows, he has a strong educational background. Having graduated from Princeton and Florida Law School, and was also in the Marines. He is a disciplined team leader as well as a down-to-earth person who relates well with everyone in any given situation. Every employee of JEA on all levels will be very comfortable with John Baker. He is a man of a deep faith who lives his truth, and you can feel that in his every endeavor. John has been a very successful businessman and has dedicated his life to giving back. You always know where John stands. He will always be transparent, and every decision he makes is ultimately very well thought through. John loves Jacksonville. He is interested in what we do for Jacksonville today, but more importantly, is vested in what he can put in place for his kids, grandkids, and the next generation. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to wholeheartedly nominate John Baker as chairman of JEA.
Jody, next up is Dr. Faison.
Dr. Faison?
Yes, good morning. I certainly won't belabor what Mr. Stein has shared, but I echo those same sentiments and wanted to nominate John Baker as our chair. In the almost 3 years that I've known John, he is just a principled leader of superlative integrity. He loves the city. I think his acumen for business and leadership in this community goes without saying. And so, again, I would echo those same sentiments and would wholeheartedly and without reservation want to nominate John Baker as our chair.
Jody, Ms. Lanahan is next.
It appears we have two motions. I was going to very enthusiastically second either of those motions.
Right now we're in the nomination, and in a moment I'll call for a motion. If there's only one nominee, but we'll do a motion practice, a motion in a second, and approve Mr. Baker as the chairman. But I want to just make sure that if there's any other nominations for the position.
Something I can do to help you get on there. I got it.
Seeing no other nominations, can I have a motion to elect John Baker as the chairman of the board?
So moved.
Second.
Can I have a second? We got a first by Ms. Lanahan and a second by Dr. Faison. Any further discussion? All in favor? I'm gonna go down the road. All in favor, Mr. DeSalvo?
Aye.
Dr. Faison?
Aye.
Dr. Haley?
Aye.
Ms. Lanahan?
Aye.
Bobby?
Aye.
Mr. Van Osdal?
Aye.
And Mr. Baker, if you accept the position as chairman of the board, you have been elected chairman to lead this organization. And thank you for your leadership and your role as chairman. At this moment in time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to your board chair, Mr. Bobby Baker. No, sorry, Mr. John Baker.
Thank you all, and thank you for those nice words, Bobby and Zachary. I really appreciate it, and I know I won't be able to live up to it, but I hope you will put up with me as we go forward. I guess the next item on the agenda is call to order, and we should have a time of reflection. Please bow your heads for a minute. Thank you. Okay, you all have received the agenda. Do we need a motion, Jody, to adopt the agenda?
Yes, sir. We'll need I'm not sure what that noise is in the background, but we do need a motion and a second to adopt the agenda that's before you.
Move to adopt the agenda.
Second.
Second.
Any further discussion? Just all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, we've passed our first big deal. Melissa, are you here?
I'm here.
Could you give us a safety briefing, please?
Of course, Mr. Chairman. The work we do at JEA is dangerous work. For this reason, safety will always be our most important priority. JEA has a tradition of having 2 employees provide the safety briefing for each board meeting, and I look forward to introducing you to our employees as soon as we're able to meet in person. In the meantime, though, for today's safety briefing, I simply thank our employees and our entire community for all they've done and continue to do to keep one another safe and well through an extraordinarily challenging time for us all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Melissa. Next is item H, Sunshine Law Public Record Statement. Is that you, Jody?
Thank you, that is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This meeting is being conducted in a transparent, open manner in accordance with the Sunshine Laws and this executive order that we're allowed to do technology. And a quorum is present. All 7 board members are present. Meetings, the recording's being taken, and meetings will be produced based upon this meeting, and we're in good order to proceed. Thank you.
Okay, the next item. The next item is the adoption of Robert's Rules and waiver of bylaws for the election of officers. We have 2 officers. I guess we need to have a motion to adopt Robert's Rules and waive the bylaws for elections. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed?
Aye.
Okay, we have 2 officers we need to elect. First, a vice chair. Do I have any nominations for that?
I believe we have
Yes,
Mr. DeSalvo.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I like to nominate Bobby Stein for vice chair, just because of his experience, his status within Jacksonville, and again, his leadership abilities and his knowledge. So simply put, I think he'd make a great vice chair. Thank you.
Dr. Faison, I saw your hand. Did you have something?
Are there other nominations? Hearing none, can we get a motion to vote on Bobby Stein as vice chair?
So moved.
Second.
Further discussion?
The only thing, sir, sorry, raising my hand. The only thing I think we need to be mindful of is, as I looked at the terms, Mr. Stein, who would make a fabulous vice chair, his term expires in February of 21. So I just think we need to be mindful of that. But I still support my motion.
Okay. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, Bobby, congratulations. I look forward to working with you. And now, as we need a secretary, could we get some nominations or a nomination for that?
You guys have done so fantastic with your mute and unmute. Don't slow down the meeting just because we try.
Jody, is it appropriate for me to make a nomination?
You can make a recommendation of who you think would serve her well in that capacity as secretary. As chairman, you could make a motion, but it's not typically done that way. But if you would recommend someone as the secretary and have one of the other members nominate or do a motion for that position.
I would recommend Marty Lanahan.
Would someone like to nominate Marty Lanahan as secretary of the board?
I would like to nominate Marty Lanahan as the secretary of the board. It's Dr. Haley.
Second.
Any discussion?
All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Marty, will you and Bobby serve?
I'd be honored to. Thank you.
Be honored to work with you, John and Marty.
Fantastic. Great. Thank you all. The next agenda item is an open letter to JEA employees. And those of you that read the Times Union saw that there was an article about this letter, and mistakenly it said that we had written this letter. I asked Melissa to draft a letter for your approval and discussion because I felt like it's really important for this board to let the employees know that this is a new board with a very different agenda, and we want to go back to being operationally excellent and operationally focused as opposed to being for sale. You all, I'm sure, have read the letter. It is just a straw man that Melissa and I have worked on, and I would love any input if you all have any to change it. Do you think, Jody, we could get it up on the screen?
I believe I just put it there, Mr. Chair.
It's the agenda is still showing, Sean.
Give it a second.
John, I've read the letter and feel very comfortable with the letter.
Okay.
I've also read the letter and was thrilled that we started our first meeting this way with a message to the JEA family, a family much like Bobby's service in the past, a family that I feel like I'm coming back to, and I will never forget the pride that we had as a family when our linemen came back after winning rodeos. And when they came back from serving other communities in times of trouble, like hurricanes and ice storms, and the rank and file of the JEA needs to know that we stand behind them, and I certainly do, and I know everybody else does. So I appreciate, John, that you authored this letter and put it at the very beginning of this important meeting. So thank you.
Other comments?
I also did have an opportunity to read the letter and appreciate, John, your foresight in working with Melissa to get this drafted. I do think, though, however, that I think this is a great first step, and I think the employees at JEA will think very well of us for this step. But I do think that perhaps there needs to be at some point an opportunity for us to hear from folks from in the employee ranks. I know that many of them are looking to be able to retrench in terms of their trust for this body. And I think this is a first good step, but I think it should not be the last in terms of how we communicate and hear from the folks at JEA.
Other thoughts?
This is Tom Van Osdal. I would simply wholeheartedly endorse what Dr. Faison just offered. rebuilding morale, showing appreciation and support, recognizing the excellence within the entire body of the JEA organization, I think is one of the principal roles for this board at this time, and really re-engendering trust and appreciation and recognition and esprit de corps. So I think there's probably a multi-channel approach to that, but I think this is an excellent start. But we need to be thoughtful about how we continue to engage and support and uplift this entire great organization. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? I would just add my thoughts that these are just words, and we will not be judged by these words. We'll be judged by our actions. And I think Zachary's recommendation is really the right action to take. And so I would ask if it sounds like we have somewhat of a consensus. Would somebody like to nominate that we do this?
I'll move it.
Second.
Further discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, we've got it. The next item on the agenda is comments from the public.
Yes, I also, through the chair request, really appreciate everybody's working with the technology, doing a great job. If we could mention who is speaking so that as we try to create the minutes going forward, I know it's difficult and I appreciate everybody trying. If you could please do that, that would be great. As we dive into the public comment section of this meeting, we will do this in 3 phases. The first one is for any public comments that were submitted via email. Madrika Jones, I believe, was collecting those. Madrika, were there any public comments that we need to read into the record submitted to you?
No, I don't have any public comments submitted via email.
Thank you, Madrika. This next phase is for those that are in the Webex meeting actively participating. If you would like to provide public comment, I ask that you raise your hand via the Webex technology. You can go into the participant list and raise your hand. I will then be able to recognize you to provide your 3 minutes of comment. For you, if you are not able to see that, you can chat that you would like to provide comment, and I will recognize you. I'm scrolling through. There's several people. I want to make sure everyone has an opportunity. I see no one at this time asking to provide public comment. The last phase is for those that dialed into the meeting. There are about 8 of you that dialed directly into this meeting as another option for us to provide access to the public. You can hit *6 on your cell phone to unmute yourself. If you would like to provide public comment at this time, please press *6 and state your name. Mr. Chair, I do not believe there are any public comments at this time. We can continue forward with the meeting.
Thank you, Sean. This is John Baker speaking. The next issue would be Councilmember Danny Beckton's, our liaison's comments. Danny, do you have any thoughts you want to hit us with?
Yes, Chairman, and I want to say good morning, everyone. And I want to say welcome to the new JEA Board. Your willingness to volunteer and serve on this very important board as a director. It is very appreciative from the many stakeholders of the organization to the hundreds of thousands of customers that JEA serves, and for the thousands of team members that it employs. We all say thank you for your service. JEA is a very important asset of the consolidated government of the city of Jacksonville. Its path forward is one that while there will be many challenges to overcome, there will also be opportunities to explore. It is those opportunities that I want to challenge you and help JEA not only find the stability and integrity that it needs, but also to help find the future that it demands. I have had the privilege to meet and discuss with each and every one of you the priorities for which you think are important. We have had discussions of how those priorities can be balanced to also bring about new ideas and explore changes to JEA's mission that together we can look to solve future problems with new opportunities. I have asked before and continue to ask the question, what can we, the City Council, do to help you help JEA? It is this question that we are waiting to hear an answer, and time is of essence, as the opportunity is always when the iron is hot. In closing, I wish much success and Godspeed in your endeavors. And if there is anything that I can do or provide in council, please do not hesitate to call upon me. Like you, I'm here to serve and desire the very best for JEA and its future. Board Chair, I would like to thank you for allowing me to share these comments this morning. And I, once again, congratulations, everyone. We have such a prestigious and accomplished set of board members that I think the city is very lucky. On my machine.
Thank you, Danny.
I apologize.
Thank you, Danny. Appreciate those comments. And there may be others that want to reply to your call for how you can help. And the one thing I think you could do would be to get your investigation done as fast as possible. We need to hire a CEO, and as long as we're investigating the past, that's made more difficult. So we all want to know what the truth was. We want to know what happened so that we can make sure that it never happens again. And as soon as we can get that done, it would be great. I know you have had trouble getting information as quickly as you wanted from JEA. Melissa assures me that we have gone through everything we can to try to get everything to you as fast as possible. But reaching back out to you, if you all do not feel like you're getting the information fast enough so that you can take care of this investigation, please let us know, and we will do our best to make that easier and better. But thank you so much for your comments.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, then we'll go to the consent agenda. There are 4 items on the consent agenda: the board meeting minutes from January 28th, the special board meeting minutes from April 3rd, the monthly financial statements, and the monthly fiscal year 20 communications and engagement calendar and plan update. I think, as I understand it, we need to get approval of the 2 board minutes. Can I get a motion for each one of them, please?
I so move.
Second.
Discussion?
I think we need to note, Mr. Chair, that I did ask Jody that to make sure that it was appropriate for us to approve minutes from a prior meeting that we were not in attendance of, and she's assured me that in proper protocol and that it's okay for us to do so.
It might make sense for Jody to make a quick, I asked, like Marty did, for background there, and she felt very comfortable.
Yeah, thank you, Marty and Bobby, as new members approving the minutes of the board of a former board member, it seems a little bit awkward or odd. But based on Robert's rules is what we're going by, because from our bylaws perspective and the board policy manual, the way we get our board minutes published and approved, those processes don't truly work right this second. And so as a new member, the minutes are simply a reflection of the factual record that occurred in the prior meeting. And it's totally appropriate as a new board member to rely upon staff members and how it's been characterized in the minutes. And until that they're approved, they don't become the official record of the board based on Robert's rules. So I would like the motion in a second, which has already happened, and approval of those minutes.
Zachary, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, does our adoption of the minutes, the past minutes, does that in any way indicate our affirmation of actions that took place at that time, or is it just a recognition meeting took place? I just want to make sure that we're clear in terms of what an adoption of the minutes by this iteration of the board affirms.
Yes, sir, Dr. Faison, you're not approving or condoning any of the actions of the prior board in your approval of these minutes.
Thank you.
Great question. Any further comments? Hearing none, we've got a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, and that was for January 28th. Can we have the same for April 3rd?
Move it.
Approval.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, and the monthly financial statements and fiscal year 20 communications, let's just move them as well, just to be careful on that. Can we get a motion to accept the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor say aye.
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 Thank you. Thank you. Now we'll go to ethics training. Carla Miller.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
good. So I wanted also to welcome you to the board. This will be very short. As you know, I've been conducting individual training with all of you for the last few weeks. So we don't have a whole hour of ethics training for this meeting. Just a short number of points that I wanted to make with you as you get started. First of all, sunshine law is key, especially in times of crisis.
Carla, we can't hear you anymore. It's Dr. Haley.
Can you hear me now?
Your mute button is on somehow.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, you seem to be coming in and out, but go ahead.
Yeah, sorry for that. It's always a challenge with these meetings. So you can hear me now, Sean?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, I was just saying that sunshine law is most important, especially in crisis. So there will be lots of people that try to influence you on different issues. And it's important that you come to the consensus of the board in your actual meeting to have argument and discussion and put all of your individual viewpoints into one consensus. So the other point is there's big ethics and little ethics. And little ethics, not to diminish the importance, but little ethics are the rules and filing forms and things that you need to keep in mind, all the things that we've gone over in our training. But big ethics are the concepts that I really want to communicate to keep your eye on, your focus on. The first one of the three that I want to mention is trust, and rebuilding the JEA employees and the public's trust in JEA is your challenge, and it's especially challenging in light of a grand jury investigation at the same time. The second big ethics concept is compassion, especially in light of the COVID crisis. We're in such a sensitive time, and kindness and compassion in all of your decisions is really essential. But lastly, I want to talk about heroes. In my opinion, you're all heroes for stepping up at this time. And some of you are double heroes because you're also stepping up in your medical capacity. So there's lots of discussion these days about heroes, medical for sure, fire, rescue, grocery workers, the Amazon truck. When they come through my neighborhood, everyone cheers like, oh, the Amazon truck is coming through. I mean, I was thinking about what does it mean to be a hero? And it comes actually from the Greek word heros. It means the protector. And it's a person who fights adversity with courage. And the main idea is that there's some form of protection, someone to help and protect against danger.
Party affiliation?
Hello? Yeah, there's some interference.
Keep going, Carla. I'll find it and mute it.
Yeah, that's fine. So the key thing when you look at research on being a hero shows a great deal of compassion to those in distress. The research shows that there's 4 things that heroes do. They give wisdom, they improve conditions, provide moral modeling, and offer protection, protection being the key. So you're probably, I don't know, there might be some of you thinking, I am not a hero. I'm just stepping up to do a job. Well, that actually is called a reluctant hero. There's doubt after initially venturing into heroism, but you will step up and rise to the occasion. So I feel that all of you are in the hero category. So I want you all to remember all of the little ethics ideas that we've gone over. They're very important, but I wanted to remind you of the big picture of compassion and protection, of being a hero for the citizens of Jacksonville. So thank you for stepping up, and ethics is always here to assist you in any way at all. You can always give me a call. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. That's really nice. I think I can speak on behalf of the board that, with the exception of the 2 doctors, the rest of us are pretended to be heroes, but they're the ones that really are out there risking their lives for this city, and we appreciate it, but we appreciate your kind words. Any questions of Carla? The next agenda item is governance training resources, a webinar and reference materials for Wallette Stanford. Wallette, are you here?
I am. Good morning. My name is Lanahan Stanford, and I am JEA's ethics officer. I've been with JEA for 17 years and worked previously in human resources and customer relationship at JEA. My role as a JEA ethics officer is to help develop and direct our JEA ethics program. In compliance into our daily operations, recommend and implement strategies.
I'm sorry, is anybody else, are you breaking up?
Things such as our nepotism policy.
Sean?
Wallette, can you do me a favor?
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Wallette, we're breaking up a little bit. So if you could do me a favor, scroll on your screen. The second button is a blue video button. If you could click on it and say stop my video, we're going to try to help take away some bandwidth use. Can you speak?
Okay. Yes.
Perfect. Why don't you keep going?
Okay. Not sure where I am. Let's start with some of the examples of the things that I'm responsible for here at JEA, such as our nepotism policy, secondary employment, conflicts of interest. and federal levels. Today, I want to just confirm a couple things. I want to make sure that on the American Commission, one publications, one was Governing for Excellence in Electric Utility. Then I also want to confirm that you received a link with 5 webinar series. This series is a way to provide you some public power utility oversight information around some duties, responsibilities, and processes to help you achieve governance. It will highlight how to monitor the utility, CEO performance, and help you gain some insight on some opportunities and challenges in the utility industry. So the webinars are about an hour each, and I realize that some of you have previously served on the board, so you may already be familiar with this. So it'll be a great refresher for you. And then for some of you, this will be new. But we want to just make sure that you have some tools to assist you because, as you know, this is a fast-paced environment that we're in right now, and we want to just make sure you had some information and some guidance. So moving forward, if you have any questions around ethics here at JEA or issues, concerns, I'm a resource for you to utilize. Again, I've been the ethics officer here for 9 years, so I am very equipped to assist in any way I can. Are there any questions? And if anyone did not receive the documents, please let me know at this time. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Wallette. We'll next go to Joe Orfano, who will give us an introduction to JEA financial statements.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and JEA board members. I'd like to introduce John DeSanto. John is the managing director.
Joe?
Yes, sir.
Real quick, Mr. Chair, I believe we skipped over an item. If we might be able to go back to the rating agency presentation.
It's 4C on the agenda.
Thank you. I apologize. Let's go back.
On this together.
Is that Melissa? Is that your?
I will start us off in this rating agency presentation, and the content that I'd hoped to have up on the screen, it seems like we're not having technical difficulties. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate you resolving that. This section is the rating agency presentation that we prepared to present to the rating agencies next month for our annual review. Because the presentation contains a comprehensive overview and review of prior year performance, we're also presenting this same information to our new board as an introduction to JEA. This also ensures that the information presented about JEA to all groups is transparent and the same body of information. We, of course, welcome questions on any and all of the presentation, but with your blessing, Mr. Chairman, given the length of the presentation, suggest that we move through the presentation first and then take questions at the end.
That's a good idea.
Super. Thank you. Sean, next page. We begin with the highlights of the business over the past year and a discussion of the strengths that we believe lay the foundation for a strong credit rating. In particular, on the electric side, we have set records in distribution reliability. Our capital program for the next 5 years is robust. It's almost $1 billion, and it's funded without the issuance of new debt. Our debt reduction that we have pursued so aggressively over past years continues. We've now repaid $2.1 billion in the electric system since 2009, and we continue that deleveraging commitment into the future. And although we're projecting rate increases as Plant Vogtle comes online next year, our affordability metrics remain healthy throughout those rate increases. And all of that lays the foundation for a great credit story. Next page. On the water and wastewater side of the business, we also have a great operations story to tell. While so many other water utilities struggle with underinvestment in infrastructure, our commitment to a healthy system ensures consistently reliable operation. In fact, our nitrogen discharge to the river is the lowest in history this year, in spite of an ever-growing population. We're not flushing the toilet less. We're just getting much better at this every year. And we'll touch on that further into the presentation. Our sizable $1.5 billion capital program over the next 5 years is driven by growth, and it's funded with a small amount of debt on a very healthy balance sheet with exceptionally healthy financial metrics projected. Our debt reduction efforts in the water and wastewater system have succeeded, meaning we're managing a capital program going forward. And our healthy financials and historic commitment to infrastructure investment mean we now have the privilege to plan long into the future for our community's water and wastewater needs, ensuring water supply for our community to fuel growth into the future. Next page. Through this presentation, I'll invite members of our leadership team to touch on nearly every aspect of JEA's business and to provide a complete picture of operations and financials to the credit analysts. We also include an early look at the impact of COVID-19 on the business and conclude with a current market refunding opportunity that make this conversation timely for both our board and the credit analysts. Next page. We begin with an introduction section. When we present this section to the rating agencies, it's historically presented by the council president and the board chair. And I'm grateful that the council president has agreed to be part of our presentation again this year as well. Next page. A part of the credit analysis of JEA is our structure as an independent authority in the city of Jacksonville. Analysts deem independence from political influence to be a credit strength, which includes an assessment of both the governance structure, which is depicted on this page, and if you'll flip to the next page, the strength and independence of our board of directors. Although the recent change in the board was not generally viewed positively by the analysts, I believe it is offset from a credit perspective by the clear strength of our new board of directors and the independence that this board will exercise in the time ahead. I truly look forward to introducing this new board to the financial community. Next page. Another important element of credit analysis is the strength and capability of the management team. You'll get to hear from many of these team members today. Even though there'll be further turnover at the CEO level, one of the rating agencies recently commented that, quote, several key managers, including the interim CEO, have been retained, providing JEA some degree of continuity with respect to daily operations during this transition, end quote. This strong leadership team provides the leadership capability and experience to ensure seamless continuity of operations and continued commitment to operational and financial stability and excellence that's so important to the credit rating analyst. Next page. The growth and health of JEA's utility business is correlated with the growth and health of the local economy. Northeast Florida has a great story to tell on that front. Our median household income now exceeds that of the state of Florida because of robust year-over-year growth, and our economy is diverse, with no single sector making up more than 20% of the local economy. We're also a story of an economic development engine that's put to work to deliberately grow certain economic sectors like education and health services and financial services. Ultimately, a critical component of our business's story, though, is the story of our customers. And I'd like to introduce Carrie Stewart, JEA's Chief Customer Officer, to provide more information about our customers. A Jacksonville native, Carrie came to JEA almost 3 years ago, bringing over 15 years of experience in local government. And she now leads one of JEA's largest and most diverse operating areas, our customer experience team, with more than 450 employees solely focused on all aspects of serving our residential and commercial customers. Take it away, Carrie.
Thank you, Melissa. As Melissa stated, our territory is very diverse and relatively stable economically in normal times. It's also a very large territory. JEA's service territory actually extends outside the bounds of Duval County and includes the entire metropolitan statistical area. And the population in the service territory grew almost 14% from 2010 to 2018. You can see from the map that those growth numbers are due in large part to the residential growth areas of Clay, Nassau, and St. Johns counties. Next slide, please, Sean. So let's start the customer breakdown with the energy system. We finished FY19 with about 47,000 accounts, 475,000 accounts, with 88% of those accounts being residential. And while that may seem lopsided, the last two charts on the bottom right show an almost even split between residential and commercial customers when it comes to sales and revenues. Next slide, please. The water system has a similar breakdown of its 366,000 customers. Overall, accounts skew heavy to the residential side, but you'll see a very healthy balance between customer types where it matters most, which is financially, between residential, irrigation, and commercial and industrial accounts. Next slide, please. And so not so surprisingly, the wastewater system follows a similar pattern for customer breakdown, with almost 93% of accounts being residential, but revenue and sales percentage breakdown between residential and commercial and industrial showing a very healthy balance. What we'd like your takeaway to be is that we have a diverse customer base with no one segment or class being dominant. Our overall sales and revenue are not dependent on or vulnerable to any one segment. Next slide, please. I'm now going to turn the presentation over to Karen Anders, our Vice President and General Manager of the Energy System. Karen came to JEA almost a year and a half ago after working in executive positions at Duke Energy and Exelon. She has over 36 years of electric utility experience. Karen received her undergraduate degree from the University of Pennsylvania and a master's degree in finance from Drexel University. She's also a licensed engineer in the state of Pennsylvania. Karen, take it away.
Thank you, Carrie. Next page, please. I'm going to start out with some of the energy system highlights from last year. We're investing significant capital to improve reliability and resiliency in our T&D systems. Our system hardening is comprised of inspection and replacement programs, as well as targeted investments to reduce repeat customer outages. In 2017, we launched a 5-year program utilizing advanced technologies aimed at significantly reducing the time it takes to identify the location of a fault, isolate it, and complete restoration work. We have also scrutinized our internal and contractor spend and have been very successful in reducing costs and have tightened our generation cost management controls. We performed a Brandy Branch advanced gas path combustion turbine upgrade last year, which added 105 megawatts to our generation portfolio. We have agreements signed with EDF Renewables to provide an additional 250 megawatts of solar PV. This will be at 5 sites, each 50 megawatts. And we also signed a new 10-year extension to the Shell natural gas supply agreement, which solidifies our base load natural gas supply and transport. The agreement is for approximately 50% of the expected gas usage. Next page, please. This is an overview of our infrastructure. We own and operate 4 power plants, Northside, Brandy Branch, Greenland, and Kennedy, and we have a joint ownership in Share Unit 4. We also have power purchase agreements, and we buy off the market. At the transmission level, we have a robust T&D system providing high reliability to our customers. We have over 744 miles of transmission lines. Our location in northern Florida enables us to have multiple transmission interties with our neighboring utilities in both Georgia as well as Florida. And these interties, as well as our internal lines, allow firm delivery of our energy to our customers. You can see some statistics on our distribution system as well, over 7,000 circuit miles of distribution system lines, 43% overhead, and 57% underground. Next page, please. So this next page shows our existing generation by fuel type and megawatts. Our units give us flexibility for fuel usage so that we can best respond to grid conditions and market pricing to decrease fuel costs while maintaining reliability. On the right-hand side is our dispatch stack. That's the order in which the generators units get run. The dispatch stack is very fluid. It changes as fuel prices fluctuate. If you look recently, Share Unit 4, which is shown fairly low in the dispatch stack for fiscal year 19. This year, it was actually one of the higher units and was off for economy. So again, very fluid. We use sophisticated software tools to analyze the many combinations to determine optimized dispatch of resources to meet load. Next page. Our fuel mix in fiscal year 19 was led by natural gas, followed by purchased power, coal, petroleum coke, and renewables. With gas prices being low, it plays an even greater role in 2020. And you can see that there's an increased commitment to renewables in our 2023 forecast, as well as the addition of nuclear as Plant Vogtle is expected to come online. Sean, the slides are not advancing. I will continue on while we do that.
Thank you, Karen.
Sure. So if you look at energy performance monitoring for transmission and distribution, our reliability metrics are among the best in the state in comparison to our peers. We continue to invest in system improvements and have significantly improved our metrics, showing favorable trends. I will note that our definition of our T&D metrics are consistent with definitions used by the Florida Public Service Commission. Our outage frequency and duration has been reduced over the last 10 years, and fiscal year 19 continued this favorable trend. A typical JEA customer sees 1.28 outages per year and a total outage duration of about 60 minutes. We've done significant improvement over the past 5 years for semi-5, which is the number of customers experiencing more than 5 outages. For fiscal year 19, only 0.08% of our customers experienced more than 5 outages. And as a result, this year, for fiscal year 20, we're tracking semi-4, which is customers experiencing greater than 4 outages. And you'll see when we get to our dashboard that we're doing very well with that metric as well. If you go to the next page on generation performance, the JEA forced fleet outage rate exceeded our target in fiscal year 19 due to extended unit recovery on Northside Unit 2 as a result of excess ash buildup. We had numerous improvements and projects implemented in generation to make the units more reliable, to have greater capacity, and to lower costs. And you'll see in our dashboard that our year-to-date forced outage rate is quite good. We have had no permit exceedances during the last 3 fiscal years, and JEA remains actively engaged in preparing for all new and emerging environmental regulations. Our next page is our capital needs and funding. Our budget for 2020 for capital is approximately $244 million, $235 million for 2021. And right now it shows less than $200 million in the out years, though that usually grows as we get closer in time. We use our capital for new services due to continued customer growth each year, both upgrading lines and building new lines and substations. And we also invest in improving customer reliability and maintaining systems, both transmission, distribution, and generation. The 5-year capital plan will be funded with no new debt, and we will maintain a healthy balance in the capital fund. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Steve Mackinac. Steve is the Vice President and Chief of the Energy and Water Planning Department. His group is responsible for long-range planning as well as real estate and economic development. Steve has a BS and MS in nuclear engineering from MIT, a Master's of Public Policy from Jacksonville University. He's a LEED accredited professional, and he's a registered professional engineer in 7 states. Steve has over 30 years of experience, the last 9 in JEA. Steve?
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, everybody. I just have a few slides. In fact, half my presentation is introducing the next speaker, so we'll just get started. I'm going to work from the PDF copy, so it's page 22 is where I'm starting. This is illustrates our generating fleet compared to the actual peaks and our planned peaks. And as you can see, based on the bars and the planning years, we're pretty much exactly right sized. And this reflects the closure of Power Park at the end of 2018. We had excess capacity because we had built in the past for more growth than we actually saw. And now that growth is pretty much flat, we're in really sort of a steady state. So really, any new generation is going to be because of any future retirement. Page 23 now. Next page, Sean, if you get it working. This represents our solar expansion. Karen mentioned the 550 megawatt universal solar expansion with EDF. Those are the orange dots on the map. So hopefully you've got your hard copies going, because the map doesn't really make sense until if you're not looking at something. And the green dots are the existing solar plants that we have. Jack Solar is out near Brandy Branch. That was our original one back in 2011. And the other 8 are the ones that we implemented from our 2014 solar policy. They range in size from 1 to 7 megawatts. And we just completed that with Sunport, which is a 5 megawatt solar plant, which also has our first utility scale battery, a 4 megawatt hour battery. Next page, there's a quick summary on the energy system overall. Strong operational metrics. Our capital plan is funded without debt, and we do have the lowest system debt right now in 34 years. Next page is page 25. It's a quick update on Plant Vogel. The image on the cover slide here is the interior of one of the containment vessels. Overview, there's no change to the in-service date. It's still November 21 for Unit 3, November 22 for Unit 4. The total project is 84% complete. Both of the units now, it's not reflected in this photograph, but they are closed in, so the top cap is on both, so there's no sunlight inside the vessel anymore. Unit 4 is lagging Unit 3 by about a year. There was some attempt earlier to compress the schedules, but COVID has sort of moved it back to the original schedule. So there's no change over the past year in the overall expected capital cost forecast. And by the end of 2019, all 4 Chinese AP1000 units, which is the same design as the Vogel units, were completed. Vogel continued to hit key milestones throughout 2019. This is just a quick summary, courtesy of Southern Company. And they continued to hit milestones through 2020. As I indicated, they've closed in the Unit 4 containment vessel as well. And I'd like to now introduce Daryl Calhoun. Daryl is the Vice President and General Manager of Water and Wastewater Systems. Daryl holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Engineering from the University of Florida and is a registered professional engineer. He has 27 years in Jacksonville Public Utilities and JEA, serving 20 of those in director roles in wastewater systems at JEA prior to assuming his current position. His team of roughly 500 is responsible for operations, maintenance, and construction activities for JEA's water, wastewater, and district energy systems, which includes both treatment facilities and pipelines. Daryl?
Thanks, Steve. I get to follow a nuclear engineer and the neighbor's lawn crews next door, so hopefully this goes fine. Nice to meet you all virtually anyway. So the first slide here highlights on the water and wastewater system. And the first is we are proud of delivering in fiscal 19 the largest capital expenditure in 15 years, coming in at $212 million. We understood that we had an expanding capital program coming, as Melissa has alluded to. So in late FY18, we worked to reorganize our team and retool our processes, including working with procurement on new project delivery methods such as CMAR. FY19, we spent a lot of time in the year bringing resources on board, such as support contracts with engineering firms for program manager for one. And as a result, we're up and running, and we expect another record year in FY20 at $231 million. Melissa mentioned the nitrogen to the river, truly an outstanding story for us. And for those that were on the board prior, you remember that we invested a lot in the systems back then. We have a slide later with historical perspective, but really it's about that investment in our facilities and innovation by our employees. Over the past year, for instance, operators at Buckman discovered a new way to treat the landfill leachate, which dramatically improved nitrogen performance there. And same with Arlington East, the facility there. Employees did great work there. We added some additional clarifier and other controls, which dramatically improved performance there as well. Third bullet there, another great story on wastewater permit compliance. We're on pace for a record-setting year. We currently, through March, stand at just 8 permit exceedances. If that pace continues, it would be our fewest number since at least fiscal 05, and just great work there by our team focused on their controls work. We actually have a number of plants receiving awards today, virtually anyway, from the Florida Water Environment Association as a result of their great work last year. Next bullet is we're leveraging technology to create a virtual pump station inspection concept. And so over the last year, we've installed and experimented with tools such as high-def cameras and infrared equipment, which will allow virtual visits to our largest pump stations, thereby saving manpower and, of course, drive time over our huge service territory. We have over 1,400 pump stations. About 300 of them are the brick-and-mortar type buildings, that big stuff. And so to the extent we can visit these virtually will certainly help us. We add about 25 pump stations per year as a result of development and growth. We're currently working with a JEA Six Sigma Black Belt to define and understand expected paybacks from the virtual pump station inspection and operational improvements as well, helping to define those that would come about. Understanding how our potable water grid is performing helps to further calibrate our hydraulic models and ensure we are providing customers with excellent service. We've doubled the number of sensors over the past year, and that's important for the work being done to create an algorithm-based system which utilizes weather and water use history to optimize aquifer withdrawals and our system pressures. Currently, the demand forecast model is essentially complete and is able to predict the hourly demand for the next 24-hour time period with about a 4% error, which is excellent. I checked in with the team, and they wanted me to point out that it's important to note the next step of optimizing constraints such as grid pressure, reservoir fill levels, and identifying optimal settings for each of our 35 water plants is very much R&D work, but the team hopes to deploy the system before the end of FY20 in our Nassau County grid first. And that's just great work there from folks in Cary's area, mine and operations, and partners from the Energy Authority. Next slide, Jason. And so infrastructure, you can see we have a diverse fleet of things to take care of, lots of 24/7 work here managed by the team. Our utility is a complex network of water, wastewater, and reclaimed water facilities and pipes serving Duval County and portions of Clay, Nassau, and St. John's. The roughly 500 people on my team include operators, mechanics, electrical, control system techs, and professionals who do an excellent job as evidenced by our metrics, which we'll discuss next. And if I missed your title, I apologize. Next slide, Jason. And so metrics here. In the upper left, you can see one of the things we focus on are unplanned water outages. You can see a number of years there plotted. It's really a measure of our reliability for our customers and the potable water grid health. Unfortunately, you can see that from the graph that outages are up primarily due to pipe breaks caused by growth of work in the rights of way as the economy has rebounded. We continue to work on that damage issue. Utility locates are in John McCarthy's area. One such effort is utilizing off-duty police officers to monitor compliance with the one called damage prevention statute. In the lower left, you can see there average minutes water pressure is less than 30 psi. That's graphed for the past 5 years. I noted previously our potable water pressure monitoring throughout our network, and this data is derived from those sensors, which currently number about 300. The metric here is the average number of minutes per month across all of the sensors for which pressure is less than 30 psi. We finished fiscal 19 at about 9 minutes on average, and you can see from the graph we have a spike there, and that was caused by drought conditions in the May timeframe, and we limited pressure in some cases to preserve reservoir levels for fire protection, things of that nature. We utilize the data to guide system improvements and communications with our customers, and currently we're in great shape for FY20 at 1.1 minutes per station. Next slide, please. So this is a lot here. It's about resiliency for our network and the work that we've done. Following Hurricanes Matthew and Irma, we launched an initiative to better understand our vulnerabilities to hurricanes and climate change. With over 1,400 pump stations and numerous treatment facilities, we have a lot of exposure. The good news here is we performed very well during Irma. I'll get into some stats here in a moment, but Irma was forecast to have been a 500-year storm. Just to give you some color on the differences between the two hurricanes and how quickly our team learned, we reduced the volume of wastewater overflows by 80% from Matthew to Irma, even though during both hurricanes, roughly half of our pump stations were without line power at some point. Performance during Irma was even more impressive when understanding flows transported through those pump stations and received at our facilities were over 35% greater than Matthew. And for further perspective, daily wastewater flow is usually around 70 to 75 million gallons per day treated. For Irma, we averaged 159 gallons each day over a 3-day period. So our resiliency work is intended to build on those great results. Our consultant developed multiple climate scenarios which incorporated various assumptions for atmospheric carbon, both sea and river level rise, more frequent and intense storms, and looking at the years 2040 and 2070 to help guide our capital decisions. Mapping of potential water levels for those scenarios were produced, and we can now use those to inform our decisions during construction activities and planning. Field work was completed to identify vulnerabilities and recommendations for improvements to our most critical facilities. Of course, power supply and power quality is obviously incredibly important to us, and we've spent time with the energy side of the business to identify system improvements. To date, reviews of all water, wastewater, and district energy, or chilled water plants, as we call them, have been completed. Regarding our largest wastewater pump stations, reviews have been completed at all Class 4 and 30% of our Class 3 pump stations. Class 4s are anything that pump over 1 MGD, and Class 3s are about the half MGD to 1 MGD range. Dual electric feed opportunities and undergrounding of services were identified as cost-effective in some cases. The resiliency program dramatically expanded our fleet of fixed and portable generators and diesel-driven pumps, and we've spent on that program approximately $25 million installing or purchasing 234 additional units. The results are that we now estimate 93% of our wastewater peak flow is covered by some form of backup power. And finally, on this slide, I'll add that we lease portable generators and diesel pumps during the 6-month storm season. In total, about 80 generators and 40 pumps at a cost of just about $1 million per year. And over the past few years, we've worked with procurement and fleet to reduce that count by balancing ownership with storm peak needs. Next slide, please. And finally, for me, the capital slide, as Karen covered for hers. The message of this capital slide is that water and wastewater systems has a substantial capital program moving forward. I draw your attention to the orange row of the table. We'll average about $300 million over the next 5 years, about a third of which is capacity-related expansion of our systems, both in plants and transmission pipelines. We've funded capital projects for many years now with internally generated funds, and our healthy balance sheet and existing rate structure will support additional debt financing at the level shown. And Joe Orfano, our interim chief financial officer, will speak more about this in his financial section. So now I'll introduce Paul Steinbrecher. Paul is Vice President of Environmental Services, leading JEA's team of environmental permitting and compliance professionals in the environmental laboratory, which serves our water and electric businesses. Paul came to JEA 19 years ago from a global consulting firm where he was a water and wastewater process specialist for utilities and industries. And he'll now cover some of our sustainability initiatives. Thank you.
There we go. Am I unmuted now, Sean? All right. Thank you. Good morning, board members. Glad to join you virtually this morning. So as Daryl said, I'm going to cover some of our water business sustainability initiatives. And I'll start with nitrogen reduction and give you a little more granularity on that. So we've been focusing on nitrogen reduction to do our part to protect the St. Johns River from harmful algal blooms since just after we took over the utility wastewater functions from the city of Jacksonville in the late 90s. The gray on this slide shows Duval County population growth since about 1970. And the blue shows the nitrogen trend to the river from the treatment systems in that service area since that time. You'll see two large drops here. Back in the 1970s, the reductions you see in the blue line occurred as towns in the United States added what is called secondary treatment. That removed about half of the nitrogen. The other big drop you see is from the capital investments made by JEA all throughout the 2000s in really a three-part program by upgrading our regional facilities, by shutting down older technology plants, and by continuing even to this day to invest in reclaimed water to serve our areas of greatest growth. Daryl mentioned some of the recent operational enhancements that we've done to even further reduce nitrogen. So we are now operating below about 400 tons per year of nitrogen, well below our permitted limit shown in red there of 683 tons per year. And I'll mention again, the lowest nutrient level to the river in our history, even with increasing population. So I think a real success story for the community. Next slide, please. Here we go. From a water supply side of the business, JEA has a 20-year consumptive use permit. We got it in 2011. We believe it provides adequate water for our needs through 2031. Our primary source of water is, of course, groundwater from the Floridan aquifer, a really pristine source of water, but a source that is also approaching its sustainable withdrawal limits in the state of Florida as our state continues to experience growth. So as our own community continues to grow, we will be looking in the future not just to additional conservation, but also to other sources of water to ensure a sustainable supply. This slide, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our programmatic approach for planning for that more diverse water portfolio. First, on the left is a program called iWater. That's what we concentrated on first, and it was designed to protect our existing groundwater withdrawal well fields and strengthen our ability to wheel water across our large service territory amongst our 37 water plants. Shown in the middle of the slide, we are now in the second half of a comprehensive integrated water resource plan. That is really a holistic master plan with a 50-year water demand projection time horizon and a 20-year horizon for identifying large granular projects on how best to integrate numerous water portfolio components. I'll give you some examples. Water transmission, such as additional river crossings, of course, continued reclaimed water supply, additional conservation or demand management, and alternative supply techniques, things that'll produce real water that are things besides groundwater. This work will come in for a landing in the fall of this year with a proposed 20-year capital investment plan, and will form the basis of our implementation plan moving forward. Next slide, please. Great. So one of the potential alternative supply options that we are exploring is purified water, which is treating safe, reclaimed water all the way to drinking water standards for aquifer recharge. We focused first, of course, if you look on the top left of the slide, on conservation and reclaimed water, both of which have been very effective in reducing our per capita use of water over the years. These are great techniques, but they won't be sufficient alone from a water supply standpoint in the future. Of the alternative supply options that are available to us, purified water is probably the most promising alternative in terms of complexity and cost. I'll give you an example. It makes much better water than what you get with typical surface water treatment, and it makes the same ultra-high purity water as desalination does, but at a much lower cost than desalination. We began the research and development journey for this in 2017 by testing the 2 leading technologies in the world for this at 2 of our water reclamation facilities. And we selected the reverse osmosis or RO-based process to move forward with in a demonstration phase at that time. It produces the highest quality water possible. Essentially, it makes ultra pure water to which we add minerals for taste. I've been drinking that this morning, some from that pilot test. This water has been tested for over 300 compounds to verify its purity. It's not really a technology issue, although astronauts, for example, drink this water every day on the space station for obvious reasons. There are many cities in the world, large cities such as Singapore and portions of LA, that have been relying on this same technology for large portions of their water supplies for many years. It's more a matter of when it fits in the water portfolio compared to other options, and more importantly, developing public acceptance for the technique because it's quite novel. We are moving in that direction now, with a design underway right now for a full 1 million gallon per day demonstration facility that we plan to have online by the fall of 2021. We've been working closely with the Water Management District on both phases of that project, and we'll use the facility for operator training, for public engagement, and as a partnership opportunity with the University of North Florida to offer internship and research opportunities for their student body. We won't be adding this water to the city water supply in demonstration mode. We'll put it into the reclaimed water system so as not to waste that water. But if this proves as promising as we believe it will be, the facility is directly expandable in the future as an actual water production facility for aquifer recharge, and it'll become one component of a more diverse water portfolio. Today, as Darrell mentioned, is Florida Water Resources Conference Day, the state's Association of Water Professionals. And we're actually receiving 2 awards, virtually, of course, at that today. The first, the Phase 2 project manager for this, Ryan Popko in our organization, is receiving the One Water Professional of the Year award for this work, a very high honor. And JEA, as a company, is receiving the state's highest reclaimed water award, the David York Water Reuse Project of the Year award for the Phase 1 R&D work, which concluded this last summer on that project. And I look forward to keeping you updated on this especially visible program as JEA leads the way in the state on sustainable water. So summarizing for the water and wastewater system, we are seeing very strong operational performance this year. We continue moving forward with an aggressive and internally financed capital plan to continually renew the system and serve the growth Darrell was talking about. We expect stable rates. Forgot to ask you to advance the slide there, Sean. There we go. Third, we expect stable rates for the next 5-year planning horizon. And of course, we're focused on sustainable supply as the water business is so uniquely a public health and environmental protection based business. With that, I'm going to turn it over now to Joe Orfano to cover our fiscal year 19 financial results. Joe has been JEA's interim CFO since the beginning of this year, and he was JEA's treasurer since 2013. He's responsible of course, in that role for overseeing all of JEA's financial affairs, including reporting, treasury, rates, planning, and budgeting. And he came to JEA with over 20 years of treasury management experience in a number of large, diversified electric utility companies. So over to you now, Joe.
Thank you, Paul. Jason, can we move ahead a couple of slides? One more, please. Thank you. This is Joe Orfano, and good morning, Mr. Chair and new JEA board members. Well, Melissa, Karen, and Daryl have stolen much of my thunder regarding our financial results. I believe in this case, repetition is good. So on slide 39, looking at these various charts, I will point out that the black lines on the chart represent threshold or target levels in our pricing policy. We have provided that pricing policy to each board member in your board orientation material. So you see the debt to asset ratio, the first chart there, in the energy system has shown continued improvement since 2015, dropping to a figure of about 62% at year end 2019, just slightly above the 60% pricing policy target. Water wastewater, we actually hit the 50% target back in 2018, have dipped below that figure in 2019. Debt service coverage to the right is extremely strong in both systems. In energy, well above the 2.2 times minimum figure. Water wastewater significantly higher than the 1.8 times coverage level, again, as stipulated in the pricing policy. Days of liquidity and days of cash have supported our very strong capital program. In the energy system, we ended fiscal year 19 at 308 days, again, significantly higher than the 150 to 250 day range in the pricing policy. And in water wastewater, significantly higher than the 100-day minimum. The chief difference between the days of liquidity and days of cash, you see in the bottom far right, is that days of liquidity also take into account our revolving credit facility with JP Morgan, and that's allocated roughly 85% to the energy system, 15% to water wastewater, but that improves our liquidity. Next slide, please, Jason. For those that have followed our rating agency presentations over a number of years, this is the classic what we said, what we did. It's been rebranded this year by David Goldberg at Carey's area director, one of my colleagues, as what we committed to and what we achieved. Much fancier way. I'll probably keep with what we said, what we did. I've talked about our debt service coverage. We hit that 2.8 times, right on the mark in the energy system. Liquidity, as I pointed out, quite strong, slightly in excess of our targets for the year. The total debt reduction, we hit right on the number. I would point out that we gave ourselves credit for the phase 2 of our defeasance plan, $48 million that was delayed until October. The board did not meet in August to approve the second phase of the defeasance plan. So I am giving our group credit for having hit that mark, which would have the effect of driving up slightly the debt to asset ratio and the debt to cap ratios. Those figures, again, were slightly higher because they do not reflect the impact of the $48 million defeasance that was done in October. You see the capital program, Karen has talked about that. just slightly ahead of the figure that we provided to the rating agencies last year. And in terms of system megawatt hour sales and base revenues, we projected slight decreases. We saw nominal increases in fiscal year 19. Next slide, please, Jason. We've talked about this debt level in the energy system, and you see from that black line, we had a debt to asset ratio in the 95% plus range back in the early 2000s. This is a cap structure that's more reflective of now defunct Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns rather than a AA rated municipal utility. We're happy that that line continues to come down. You see a slight blip in 2018 that reflected the shutdown of St. Johns River Power Park, where those assets were removed from our books. So it had the impact of increasing the debt to asset ratio. But again, we will continue, and I'll show you later in projections that we continue to drive that figure down. Melissa commented earlier, we've had a $2.1 billion reduction in debt since the peak. When we factor in October scheduled maturities and that $48 million defeasance, we dropped debt another $200 million. So since that period in 2009, the peak, we've actually dropped debt now $2.3 billion. And our variable rate exposure remains quite low and in an acceptable range of unhedged variable rate debt of 8%. We have, in fact, entered into floating to fixed rate swaps on another 19% of our debt portfolio. And you see that graph on the pie chart on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. Obviously, this chart has received a lot of attention in the community. We had significant growth dating back to the 90s, actually dating back as long as JEA has been a utility, frankly, in strong annual growth in unit sales. And that began to taper off as a result of the Great Recession and really has never come back. This year, we're projecting kWh unit sales of approximately 12.18 million megawatt hours. Next year, 12.2. And you see a slight dip in the following year down to 12 million flat, which has been our planning scenario shared with the rating agencies since fiscal year 2014. System planning forecast is done by Steve McInall's group. That shows a modest 0.54% increase over that forecast period. Again, very modest and really done for a different reason than what we're showing the rating agencies. Next slide, please. Current residential bill, obviously that debt to asset ratio was not sustainable. So we entered into a period in the 2000s of raising rates, actually 28 through 2012, there were rate increases, really leveled off since that period of time. You see the current bill, 123.34. The components of that bill are in that chart to the right. In the next slide, we'll get into the next 5 years. So Jason, if you could move to that slide. You see the 123.34, which is this fiscal year, growing to a projected level of 134.79. That is a relatively modest compound annual growth rate of 2.24%. And that is largely due, the increase per year, largely due to taking on the MEAG Vogtle purchase power agreement. Next slide, please. So in terms of our next 5 years, the 2020 through 2024 financial projections, these charts belie a AA rated electric utility, debt service coverage 4 times, largely in the period, debt to asset dropping from the current level in the low 60s down to 52%, continuing to make tremendous improvement in our leverage. And days of liquidity and days of cash remain quite robust. Next slide, please. On the water and wastewater system, again, what we said and what we did, sorry, David, what we committed to and what we achieved. We talked about this earlier, significant debt service coverage levels well and above our pricing policy. 3 times we achieved. The days of cash on hand and days of liquidity significantly higher than what we said. Again, a little bit of this, quite a bit of this increase is due to the delay in the defeasance, phase 2 defeasance for water and wastewater represented another $45 million. And that $45 million has a bigger impact to water wastewater than it did to electric. So you see these liquidity measures are quite a bit stronger than what we forecast for that reason. Debt to asset ratio and debt to cap, the debt reduction, we hit right on the mark, again, taking into account that $45 million we did in October. We did not take that into account in the next 2 ratios, which come right from our balance sheet. So you see slight upticks in those ratios relative to our commitments, again, due to the delay in that defeasance. The capital program, as Daryl mentioned, quite robust. And then KGL sales and system revenues, quite good. Next slide, please. So in terms of the debt to asset ratio and debt reduction in water, wastewater, we peaked in the close to 70% debt to asset ratio. We did not have as far to come in terms of reducing that number as we did on the energy side. So you've seen eclipsing our 50% target last year, and then in this fiscal year, significantly below. And I'll show you projections in a minute to demonstrate continued improvement. In terms of the debt composition, we dropped that debt balance. The peak for water and wastewater was in 2011. We've dropped that peak by $676 million since that period of time. Due to scheduled maturities and that $45 million defeasance in October, we've dropped another $100 million. So a total of $776 million since 2011. Variable rate exposure consistent with the energy system has been reduced down to 12%, marginally higher than the energy system. We'll look at possibly including some floating to fixed rate, not swaps, but converting some of the variable rate debt to fixed rate with a refunding opportunity that we have coming up. We have spoken to the new board members regarding that, and we're going to take a good hard look at it. Next slide, please. In terms of unit sales, we've had strong growth throughout the years, and unlike energy, continued to grow. You see a financial planning forecast in the 20 to 24 time frame that represents roughly a 3% annual increase versus a system planning forecast of 4.25% on average per year. Next slide, please. So Daryl alluded to this earlier too. It's been a tremendous story in our residential water bill over time. You see it's been flat since 2012 and anticipated to remain flat during the forecast period. And that's spending $1.5 billion of capital over this next 5 years and taking into account the approximate $400 million in incremental new money debt. So you see that bill is going to remain quite steady and quite different, a positive story relative to some of our brethren that have huge capital programs over the next 5 years and intend to raise rates significantly. The next slide, please. So water, wastewater financial projections, if these don't demonstrate a AAA rated water and wastewater utility, I don't know what do. Debt service coverage, quite strong. Debt to asset ratio, as Melissa pointed out earlier, 43%. Again, significantly below not only our target, but also peer group medians, days of liquidity and days of cash. Again, world-class AAA operation. So with that, I'll turn the next section over to Herschel Vineyard on enterprise risk management. Herschel has served as JEA's Chief Administrative Officer since April of 2019. In this role, Herschel oversees corporate compliance, legal, environmental, and governmental affairs. Prior to joining JEA, Mr. Vineyard served in private practice, positioning clients for success with federal, state, and local officials on a range of economic development, environmental, and legislative matters. Herschel served as Secretary of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection under Governor Rick Scott from 2011 to 2014, where he was involved in all aspects of state-level environmental policy and regulation, including environmental permitting, water policy, and ecosystem restoration. Its current environmental areas of focus for JEA are on water supply and reuse projects. Herschel, I will turn the virtual microphone over to you.
Thank you, Joe. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I want to introduce for you JEA's Enterprise Risk Management Program, the ERM program. It was formed in 2005, and it's designed to identify the key risks to JEA's business. Many of you may be familiar with the ERM program through your own businesses. The ERM program is run by Frank D. Benedetto. He's a 17-year employee at JEA. He's done a fantastic job. He's owned the ERM program almost all of his 17 years. He's produced a mature, stable ERM program, but not stagnant. He's constantly with his team refining the ERM program, changing methodologies. Frank and I are meeting later this week to look at our subcommittee structure to see if we can refine and better craft that program. Frank is a leader nationally among the large public power community with the ERM program. He really sets the mark for ERM among public power utilities. JEA's ERM program identifies the risk to our business through the committee structure. What you'll see on the slide there is 9 blue circles representing various parts of JEA's business. And those subcommittees, and you'll see it's electric risk, water and wastewater, and technology projects. Those subcommittees are populated with subject matter experts, and they meet, identify the risks, identify the negative financial impact to JEA and the probability that those risks would occur. They also add in there the time frame of the risk occurring, JEA's ability to shape the impact, the likelihood of the risk, and how prepared we are to mitigate that risk. And so when that subcommittee, when they finish their analysis, they assign a risk score based on a scoring methodology, and it's art and science as well, but it does help us prioritize that risk. So each individual risk analysis is submitted up to the ECRC, which is the Enterprise Compliance and Risk Committee, and that's the orange circle on your slide there. And what the ECRC does is evaluates the subcommittee's work and comes to a consensus on what the greatest risks are within JEA. Next slide. The next slide is a heat map. It's a graphical representation that helps us kind of prioritize the risks. Obviously, you'll see from the chart there, the green would be the lowest criticality, and the reddish orange would be the greatest risk under that heat map. And so that's something is a tool we use to help us focus on what's important. The final slide is our dirty dozen, and it is the top 12 risks that the ERM program has identified for JEA. You'll see in each one of them, there's a very short blurb on explaining the kind of risk. Typically, we dive into these risks at the board's Finance and Audit Committee, which should be coming up next month. So that's all I have. Now introduce Sean Eads, our Chief Information Officer. Sean moved to Jacksonville along with his family about a year ago. JEA was successful in recruiting him from GE Appliances. Sean's got amazing technical capabilities, but one of the things that I found that is rare in the CIO world is he can effectively communicate those technology issues to folks that aren't as focused on technology. So Sean, congratulations, you're next.
Thanks, Herschel. Jason is my right hand, so I'll make sure we progress as we go along. For many years, JEA has taken a systematic approach to asset management following international standards for asset management and utilities. With advancements in digital technologies across all industries, companies have come to the realization that data is at the core of nearly every piece of business, and JEA is no exception. With goals around optimizing our operations and becoming a truly digital utility, now more than ever, we must lean into the fact that if we don't harvest our vast amounts of data and turn them into actionable information, we will not be providing the services necessary for our customers and for our community. 4 years ago, JEA understood that our approach for the maintenance and upkeep of our data, along with our siloed approach to turning that data into information, was not providing all the benefits that it should be, and that we needed to take a different approach. At that time, we set out on a journey to understand how we can attack our data through an enterprise program designed to bring all of our data together, providing mechanisms for our business partners to readily convert the data into information. We kicked this program off and we called it Enterprise Information Management. Our vision, as seen on this slide, is to integrate data from our critical independent systems as well as the data from our projects and processes into a virtual clearinghouse where we can trust the data to be true and accurate. We then provide secure access to the data so that it can be harvested into actionable information, cutting down on the need to go from system to get portions of the data necessary for analysis. By streamlining the upfront data work, our business professionals, as well as our data scientists, will be able to quickly create visuals and analytic models that will allow data-driven decisions to improve our ability to serve our customers. The final part of our vision is to eventually allow cross-business data from the water, wastewater, to the electric systems, to our customer data, and allow that in conjunction with one another in ways that we have yet to see possible. The first couple of years was spent understanding the technology capabilities needed to support such a need, as well as building out the infrastructure necessary to support the volume of data that our systems are capable of generating. Over the past year, we have dove into proof of concept efforts to build working capabilities aligned to our vision. Recently, we completed a POC around Asset 360, which was a vision to provide our field a mobile experience allowing them to get instant access to the most current data, including data directly from manufacturers on assets in the field by scanning a simple barcode. Through that application, they can see all the asset information and verify that it is correct. They can also see work orders outlining what they are there to be performing, as well as a history of all the work orders so they can understand what has been done to that asset. They can also generate new corrective work orders that they discover while they're out at the site so that we can have proper information about the history of what we do to that asset. By providing this capability to our operators while they're standing at the asset, we believe that we will be improving their productivity as well as the accuracy with which they will make decisions, and that our systems will become more reliable and our decision-making more accurate. We also ran a POC where we brought together data from our operational system, PI, and our voltage data from our grid partner, Landis & Gear. We allowed this insights with these two data pieces that hadn't been seen before. They worked on models to predict abnormal usage behaviors, as well as seeing where our data was not as accurate and needed to be addressed so that we could go and actively clean it up. This brings us to today. We are excited to bring our Asset 360 mobility solution to production and roll out a larger pilot this summer. By building out the production environment, we will be able to turn around additional rollouts of the tools and expand our vision even more into fiscal year 21. I look forward to coming back to the board and talking about the advancements that we have made and the financial benefits that Enterprise Information Management System has delivered for our community. And now we'll go back to Carrie to talk about the COVID-19 impacts.
Thank you, Sean. Can you advance it one more slide, please? So as you all on the board know, we've been providing the board and our elected officials throughout the service territory twice weekly updates on our operations during the COVID-19 pandemic. So you've seen most of the information on the next 3 slides because they were produced last week. So I'll give you an update on the data as it stands today. Our top priority remains the safety of our employees. Reminder that all non-field employees, including our call center staff, are working remotely from home, as are most of your senior leadership team today. To date, 15 members of the JEA team have been tested for COVID-19. 13 have confirmed negative. 1 is confirmed positive, obviously resulting in 1 with results pending. Currently, there are only 2 JEA employees in quarantine or isolation. We continue to learn, plan, and implement best practices to keep our employees safe. Next slide, please. You'll remember that we have already implemented customer relief programming, and starting next week, customer bills will go out reflecting the fuel charge rebate. We saw an uptick in payments when the federal stimulus checks were sent out a few weeks ago, and then a return to the levels of disconnect eligible customers we saw early on in the pandemic. We have close to 24,000 accounts eligible for disconnect as of this morning. To give you a little context, an average day in non-COVID times, you'd normally see about 2,000 accounts eligible for disconnect. It's important to note that 40% of the disconnection eligible accounts today are prepay customers, and the median delinquency on those accounts is $78. We do believe that the level of disconnect eligible customers is flattening. We're working every day on plans to assist our residential and commercial customers with their accounts once we resume disconnections, and we'll keep you updated on those programs. Next slide, please. Analysis of a 10% reduction in sales for the energy and water and wastewater systems during the March through September timeframe due to the COVID-19 pandemic do not result in material degradation of either system's credit metrics. The sales reduction is a conservative estimate of the impact of the pandemic, and more sophisticated analysis of the impact is forthcoming, likely this week, and again, we'll share it in an upcoming update. Liquidity remains strong with approximately $100 million of operating cash and $145 million in renewal and replacement funds, in addition to a $500 million revolving credit facility. We'll continue to provide you with the twice weekly operational and financial updates throughout the emergency declaration. Please let us know if there are certain statistics you would like to see, and we'll keep you up to date on them. Next slide, please. We'll hand this presentation back over to Melissa.
Thanks, Carrie. I'm going to bring us home on the next slide with a recap of the credit strength story that we touched on at the very beginning of the presentation. Both utilities continue to show strong financial metrics, a commitment to conservative financial management demonstrated by massive debt repayment of more than $3 billion since our peak. And as a side note, $2.6 billion of that is since I've joined JEA. So I've had the privilege of seeing our team doing this extraordinary work firsthand. A commitment to operational excellence and a plan for the future to ensure continued operational and financial excellence. As I mentioned at the beginning, this presentation is timely because we have a current refunding opportunity that could save our customers substantial money on future debt costs. So I'm actually going to hand the presentation back over to Joe to talk about the current bond market opportunity.
Next slide, please, Jason. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you. As Melissa commented on her clock, we've reduced debt by $2.63 billion. Melissa provided another 0.3. It's quite a story. And $3.05 billion since 2010 represents a 48% reduction in our debt portfolio. My Treasury group has been a voracious refunder of debt as well. Since 2012, we have refunded $4.26 billion of bonds, representing approximately $33 million in annual debt service savings. This latest opportunity is in step with that historical refunding of JEA bonds. We're looking, based on information provided by our financial advisor, Public Financial Management, PFM, we have the opportunity to refund approximately $420 million of bonds, creating net present value savings of $54 million and annual debt service savings of $3.3 million. Again, these figures are quite in line with our historical performance on refundings. In terms of authorization, we are working under existing board bond delegation refunding resolutions that were approved in 2018. The latest approval was in 2018. We've actually had these refunding resolutions in place since 2010, initially annually and then biannually beginning in 2014. So we are raring to go to get into the market. And with that, the remaining slides in the presentation deal with the board bios and summary projection information for the benefit of the rating agencies. So I'll turn the presentation back over to Melissa.
Thanks, Joe. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the presentation for this morning, and be happy to take any questions from you or any of the rest of the board members.
Questions?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I just want to reference us back to the letter to the employees that we started this meeting with and say, wow, I'm so proud of what this organization has accomplished. Since I was previously involved over, about that 2010 timeframe, we did raise rates 3 times and put the fuel adjustment clause in place. But over the period of time since I served last, the deleveraging strategy we put in place, the discipline around that, I'm impressed with. The nitrogen discharge reduction was only a reduction we could dream about back then, and the wastewater overflow situation is significantly improved. And that's just, 2 or 3 of the things that I will tell you as we went through this presentation. It struck me is just what a great job this team has done and what a jewel the JEA is for this community. So thank you all. You should be awfully proud.
John?
Marty. Yes, Bobby.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing this brings out, if you look at the graph on the energy side, is economic development is going to be key to the future of Jacksonville and JEA. So I would make sure that we have some type of focus on economic development. The other things I would mention would be it'd be worth, as a board, sitting down with the Energy Authority and getting their thoughts on hedging our fuel supply or looking at hedging our fuel supply. I know we have done quite a bit of it. Melissa and I have talked about it, but I think it'd be worthwhile sitting down and understanding fully what our hedging strategy is on the fuel supply. And the only other thing I'd bring up, John, is having variable rate debt at the water and sewer of 12%. I'd try to work to get that number down. So those would be my comments.
Mr. Chair, you have Mr. DeSalvo that would like to comment.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Joe DeSalvo. Minor point, and it's probably a question for Steve McEnall. Getting back to Plant Vogel, and I think it was slide 26. In the very bottom, it mentions about the Chinese facilities or Chinese thing. Just a minor point, but if I understand it right, this is Westinghouse who supplies the AP units, 1,000 units, and they were prime contractors for these 2 facilities in China, and that this facility in Plant Vogel does not use any Chinese technology. Is that correct?
This is Steve McEnall. That's correct. The Chinese units did use obviously their labor, but Westinghouse was the EPC contractor there. They provided all the internals, all the major equipment. Really, the components for Vogtle come from all over the world. There's components from Italy, South Korea, Japan, the U.S. It's truly an international nuclear project. There are no Chinese components, however, in Vogtle 3 and 4. The Chinese units also were earlier design. This is there were some modifications made after September 11th to the external protections to prevent against airplane impact, and the Chinese didn't implement those changes. So this is about 4 revisions of the design criteria document, more advanced than the Chinese units.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Chair, we also have Mr. Van Ostel that would like to speak as well.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great presentation. Certainly provides quantitative evidence of a really strong, vibrant organization, which we know JEA to be. So I really appreciate all aspects of the presentation. My question is a simple one, and it does relate back to the letter to the JEA employees. And specifically, I'd like to know what we're going to do to recognize and celebrate the 2 awards that Mr. Steinbrecher outlined, the individual, the project manager, as well as the award that JEA is receiving virtually today. Those are the kinds of things I think we need to lift up and celebrate and call out as we endeavor to re-engender trust and rebuild morale within the workforce and reposition JEA as really the bright star within the community. Thank you.
I couldn't agree more. And Mr. Chairman, if I could just make a quick comment in response to that. I had hoped that and still hope that the board will join me in celebrating those employees as soon as we can get together in person. I just didn't recommend that we include it on the agenda for this meeting because we are virtual and it's sort of hard to do that recognition over Webex. But I agree with you. Those employees have done some extraordinary things.
Mr. Chair, we have Dr. Faison and Ms. Lanahan that also would like to say something else. Dr. Faison? I unmuted you, sir.
Okay, thank you. A very thorough presentation. I appreciate all the work that we did. My question is regarding the customer relief program.
I'm sorry. Someone, hold on real quick, Dr. Faison, sorry. I think I've muted everybody. Go ahead, sir, sorry.
Okay. Again, thank you for the presentation, very thorough and informative. My question is with regard to the customer relief and assistance program. First of all, wanting to acknowledge the leadership in JEA for making that accommodation pursuant to the fact that we are all experiencing are suffering under this global pandemic. But my question is, has there been any thought to how long we would continue to provide that customer relief? And at what point would it begin to impact us from what overall impact is that having, and how long do we see being able to do that? Obviously, wanting to be sensitive to the needs of our customers during these troubled times, but at the same time wanting to balance that with our need to collect for financial purposes. So just if anyone could give me some insight in that regard.
Dr. Faison, I think you've hit on such a really important question, and I'll provide you some insight into our thought process around that. And Carrie, if you could jump in with some of the more specific program details, if that'd be helpful. The way that we've approached this is across the industry, not just JEA. When this global pandemic started to affect our community, we suspended disconnects. And again, the entire industry did that in recognition of the hardship that our community was enduring. If you've got children home from school, if you've got parents having to deal with homeschool, if you've got everyone working from home, if you've got people who are sick, Disconnecting utility service this is not the right time to do it. But as you point out, that does create a financial burden for us. And Carrie's group has been monitoring what that looks like in terms of risk for us going forward. So we are starting to put some more refinement in terms of expectations and numbers around it. But we do expect what historically is record low for us. Our write-offs are typically record low for the industry. We do expect an uptick in that this year. Balancing that, we hope, is the influx of federal aid. So, and the balancing of programs that we're going to offer to customers to make it easier on them to be able to get back on their feet. There was $900 million of additional federal aid that was included in the first stimulus package for LIHEAP, which is specifically for electric bills. And we expect additional aid to be forthcoming. And we hope that much of that will impact our community. We're still working to get numbers on what that looks like. Carrie, can you jump in with some comments on how we've been approaching the restart of disconnects and how we plan on helping our customers get back on their feet?
Sure. Thank you, Melissa. And Dr. Faison, great questions. We monitor this on a daily basis on both the residential and the commercial side. We have 170 key accounts on the commercial side. Those are our largest 170 customers. And we are in constant contact with them to understand what's going on, not only on their side of the meter, but on our side of the meter. For our residential customers, as I said, we've seen a flattening out. We think everyone that's not going to pay or can't afford to pay, we think we're reaching that threshold now. What we think we will need is a 3-week lead time to let customers know. For 3 weeks from now, we will restart disconnects. So we think a 3-week ramp will help all of our customers, both residential and commercial, that are going to need assistance once we start disconnect, to get them with the right resources they need. Some of them that Melissa just talked about. Some of them will be payment arrangements, pay plans that will be much longer than we normally allow for either residential or commercial. We're going to continue to waive the convenience fees for credit cards. It's a big deal for our commercial customers for 6 months. We may extend that further. We don't know. That's a great cost to JEA, but it's been a huge relief for our customers. So we're monitoring it on a daily basis. We do have a plan, and we believe if we give a 3-week ramp time, lead time for our customers to know, we can get in contact with them. They can get in contact with us. We can work with our nonprofit partners. We can get them on the right pay plans, and we can get everybody up and running again.
Do we think that 3 weeks is enough time to make, have communication with all of those customers that might be impacted in terms of reaching out to them and having some contact with them to try to make, payment arrangements? This 3 weeks. I'm just trying to figure out the volume of customers. We feel confident that we can reach all those folks in the next 3 weeks, or
Yes, sir. That is our current belief. We believe that once we give the signal, it's 3 weeks from that point, customers will start calling again. The customers that are in that 24,000 disconnect eligible group now are largely residential, largely prepay. So they are some of our most vulnerable customers already. And they take price signaling and disconnect signaling seriously, and they call and they know the programs that are available to them. Our nonprofit partners are really ramping up with all of the federal funding that's coming in, ramping up their call centers, ramping up their ability to work with our customers as well. So right now, our best assessment is 3 weeks will be enough time with the call center volume that we will be able to take and our nonprofit partner call centers.
Okay, thank you.
And yeah, Melissa, I just wanted to be reminded of the process to do the bond refinancing that we've discussed in the package. Does that have to come back to us to approve? Because it's in the spirit of timing. This is great timing for us to look at what Bobby recommended on the fixed to variable side, but certainly the refunding that's addressed on page 64.
There's two components that the board is involved in approving with respect to this refinancing activity. And Joe, jump in if I miss anything here. The first is providing authorization to access the market in general. And that authorization already exists. There's delegated resolutions that are in place that cover a 24-month time period and that have enough room to be able to accomplish the refinancing. The second piece of approvals that we'll need from the board is with respect to the disclosure document itself. And so we will be sending that document to board members for review and approval in the coming weeks. And that approval is needed as a step to enable us to then turn around and share that document with investors. Later on the agenda for this board meeting, there's going to be a training around disclosure to make sure board members are equipped to conduct that review.
Okay, perfect. So there's no action needed at this juncture.
Correct.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm sure there are more questions, but we need to move along. If you've got a really important question, feel free to ask it. Otherwise, we may be here till dark.
Mr. Chair, could I comment?
Please.
I just want to remind the JEA Board and senior leadership that this past week, the Jacksonville City Council approved with the mayor's office $159 million of stimulus money for the COVID for the city of Jacksonville. And with that, we allocated $40 million for 40,000 families to be able to get a $1,000 grant from this fund. And the stipulations on that is for any household that has a $75,000 or less income and has lost 25% of any of their income to the COVID-19. And I think this is important in the fact that that $1,000 could be used not only to pay mortgages, but certainly utility bills. And I believe the administration stated that it would probably be about 4 to 6 weeks because it is going to require these folks to come in and actually do a personal interview. So just want to make JEA aware and perhaps use that tool to help your customers perhaps access that $1,000 and be able to overcome any debt that they have in paying their utility bills with this resource that the city's providing. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention.
Thank you. Kerry, did I understand you to say that we were giving the 3-week notice today, or that we would give a 3-week notice when we decided?
We would give a 3-week notice when we decide. We are not giving that notice today.
Well, I think the councilman's comments are good, and we should keep that in mind as to when the $1,000 would become available. I'm going to ask if we could move on. I don't think we'll probably get through this whole agenda, but I do think we should, if you'll be okay with it, we've got some outside people that have come, and I think we ought to try to get through their presentations. And then if we have time, we can come back for some of our training. And so I'm going to skip the introduction to the JEA financial statements for the moment and go to the disclosure policies and Mike Watkins of Greenberg Targ.
Well, good morning, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much. We appreciate your patience here this morning. We just want to provide a real quick disclosure training for you. I know it's your first day and we're hitting you with a lot, but yeah, there we go. If you go ahead and go to this next page. All right. So who are these people and what are they doing here? We are Greenberg Traurig JEA's Bond Counsel and Disclosure Counsel, but today we're going to be focusing on our Disclosure Counsel role. And what that means is, broadly speaking, we assist with JEA's communications with the financial markets. There are two big documents you use to do that. One's your annual disclosure reports, which includes your financial statements, and the other one are the offering documents that go with each particular bond issuance that you do. Those are the two biggies. There are others. So today we'll just provide a brief review of the applicable federal securities laws and how they apply to you as board members and to JEA as a whole. So our responsibilities, again, include reviewing and commenting and drafting some of JEA's disclosure documents. We help with the due diligence process that the underwriters who purchase the bonds do with each issuance. They have questions, and we go through all those, make sure that everything's included in your offering document. We review presentations, such as your rating agency presentations that you went through today, and provide comments to those. We also provide a securities opinion, a 10b-5, which is an anti-fraud provision of the securities laws. We'll discuss that here in a little bit as one of the opinions with each bond issuance. If you go to the next page, please. Again, we advise JEA on your disclosure issues. So a lot of it's what you saw in your rating agency presentation. We advise you with the standards of disclosure under the applicable securities laws. We'll be discussing a lot of that today, and how that works with your disclosure documents. And so we work closely with your staff, Joe and his staff. They've done an excellent job, and they've got a great handle on your existing debt and the planned refundings that we have coming up. Again, the annual disclosure reports, I mentioned that earlier. Those are big documents. Usually once a year, you're going to be asked to take a look at those, and we're going to help you sort of show you where to focus on that. And again, periodic training, which is what we're here to do today. I've got two of my colleagues, John Wilson and Melissa Rogers. They've been doing these presentations all over the country. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to John and sort of take it from here.
Good morning, board members. My name is John Wilson. I serve as the managing shareholder for the Orlando office of Greenberg Traurig, and along with Melissa Lopez Rogers, as Mike mentioned, we do these trainings all over the country, and we usually do them for much longer periods of time. But given the length of your agenda, what your senior leadership team has asked us to do is give you a brief primer of, as Mike was saying, the applicable securities laws and some of the strategies that JEA and its senior leadership team has been using over the years to achieve some great results, as you've seen in some of the financial information that's been presented. We are tremendously glad to be new members of your financing team, and we appreciate the opportunity, as Mike said, to serve as both your bond and disclosure counsel. The next slide, please. Next, please. So, essentially there are two major federal securities laws that are involved anytime where there's a sale of securities. One is the Securities Act of 1933, and then the other is the Securities and Exchange Act of 1934. And so every sale of securities has to comply with those requirements, which include registration and a series of other disclosures that have to be made to investors. And Congress, in its infinite wisdom, enacted the Tower Amendment years ago, which exempted municipal securities from most of the provisions of those acts, except for what Mike mentioned, which is the anti-fraud provisions of Section 17A of the Securities Act and Section 10B of the Exchange Act. And you'll be hearing this term anti-fraud provisions throughout our presentation and certainly throughout your dealings with the securities offerings that JEA will bring to market. Some of you, because you've been at this before, might be very familiar with those, and some of you may not. But essentially, the anti-fraud provisions require providing investors with all, relevant and material information necessary for an investor to make an informed investment decision, and prohibits the making of any untrue statement of a material fact or any omission to state a material fact that would be necessary in order to make the statements made in light of the circumstances they were made not misleading. And so that's really the bogey that any municipal issuer has in accessing capital markets. Next slide, please. So we talk about accessing the capital markets. So again, you understand that the scenario that we're dealing with is providing all relevant material information. Unfortunately, the SEC has not given a lot of guidance as to what materiality means, but it forces you to look at every information that you provide from what a reasonable investor would want to know in making a reasonable decision. But as I mentioned before, the Tower Amendment excludes the municipal issuers from the regulatory registration aspects of it. So a lot of what the SEC has done in trying to manage fraud in the market is through regulating broker dealers or investment banks who put your securities into the marketplace. So we have, in addition to the two rules that we mentioned, the Securities Exchange Act of 1933 and the Securities Exchange Act of 1934, the SEC brought into place Rule 15C212, which is another rule that you'll be hearing a lot about. And that rule was designed to address fraud and manipulation in the municipal securities market by requiring underwriters who would bring the securities into the marketplace to provide certain information to investors in primary offerings. In other words, the offering document, which Melissa mentioned before, that is going to be brought to you for review and approval in connection with the refunding. But also, it requires these underwriters to obtain a commitment from each issuer to provide continuing disclosure to the market so that the secondary market trades can be done on an informed basis. So next, I want to have my colleague, Melissa Rogers, go through what are some of the key provisions relating to the anti-fraud laws that we talked about. Melissa?
Yes, thank you. Next slide, please. So what I'm going to focus on is really, Jean laid out really the underlying law that's applicable to securities offerings. And my focus is going to be on, what happens if you don't follow the law. And so essentially there's two potential consequences. There is civil litigation that could be brought by investors, which we address in further detail in the supplemental information that's attached to the presentation that we won't be covering in detail to keep our presentation brief. And then there are several actions that the SEC can take, and those include inquiries, investigations, administrative proceedings, and temporary restraining orders. The interesting thing about the SEC's enforcement actions in the municipal security space is that they're a bit counterintuitive. And so unlike private parties involved in litigation, the SEC doesn't have to prove damages or harm, only that a statute was violated in the municipal securities context. And this is the framework under which JEA is subject to. And so, really the question is, why does that matter? And the key reason is that there doesn't have to be any default. There don't have to be any investor losses proven. And unlike private litigants, the SEC doesn't have to prove that investors actually relied on a potential misstatement. And that's important because they don't have to, like a private litigant, prove that there was an investor that actually reviewed the offering document and relied on a particular fact or opinion presented in that document. And next slide, please. Another thing that's a bit counterintuitive about SEC enforcement actions in the municipal securities space is that JEA is a public entity. And so a lot of what JEA does is in the public domain, meaning that it potentially loses some of the defenses that it would have or protections that a lot of private defendants sometimes rely upon. As Carla mentioned earlier, the JEA board is subject to the sunshine laws, and that is different. There are corporations that may be subject to SEC enforcement actions that are not subject to the sunshine laws and therefore have protections that JEA does not have. And so an example of that would be attorney-client privilege, and the attorney-client privilege protections that a corporation would have are significantly broader than what JEA would have as a public entity subject to the sunshine laws in Florida. Similarly, for political reasons, a public entity such as JEA may not be able to take on certain defenses that a private defendant or a private corporation would be able to do. Next slide. One of the things that's important to understand is who is liable under an SEC enforcement action. And so liability for fraud can attach to an issuer, its directors, governing board members, officers, and staff. And in addition, we've seen in SEC enforcement actions that in addition to JEA as the organization, individuals within the organization may be subject to penalties, fines, injunctions, and in extreme cases, and we don't mention this to scare anyone, incarceration. And that really is very extreme when we're talking about all of these penalties and really talking about kind of bad actors, people that knew that there was a deteriorating financial condition and were taking, very explicit, purposeful steps to try to hide that information from investors. So a lot of this really is not applicable to the things that would occur in the normal course where an issuer has implemented, like JEA, sound disclosure policies and procedures. The one thing that is very important to note is the SEC doesn't expect staff or officials or certainly board members to be expertised in every subject matter or financial analysis that is presented to it. The issuers and board members can rely on professionals, but their reliance must be reasonable. And so I think that's an important standard to understand. And there is no official immunity. We have seen some increased activity in terms of enforcement actions taken by the SEC in the municipal security space. And we think it's very important to have disclosure procedures in place to address that. And in working with JEA staff and the senior leadership team on the annual disclosure reports, we have seen that there are some very, very good procedures in place. And next slide, please. And before I pass it back to Jean Wilson to talk about some of the additional strategies that issuers can use to manage its liabilities, I'll say that it's really important to note that JEA has bylaws and policies in place, procedures, and the scope of the board members' responsibilities and their obligations as it relates to the offering of municipal securities
is laid out in those documents. And so any attendant liability really would be looked at in the scope of those responsibilities and obligations, which obviously are limited. The SEC's expectation is not that you will be expertise in everything that comes before you, and you can rely on the senior leadership team and other outside consultants and professionals engaged by JEA. Just broadly, the things to note in terms of strategies to manage JEA's liability under the anti-fraud provisions is just really knowing the federal anti-fraud laws and how they apply to you. And so Jean gave a brief summary of those at the outset of our presentation. Those provisions are covered in more detail in the supplemental information that's attached to the presentation. And just having the basic understanding of knowing when you're speaking to the market. Part of that is in your offering documents when you're offering securities to the public market. Part of that are voluntary notices, annual disclosure reports, the things that you're posting on the JEA website, and other public statements. Obviously, using reasonable care with respect to disclosures, being mindful of the information that's being put into the public markets, the public space, and making sure that that information is accurate and complete and is, as Jean mentioned earlier, not making a material misstatement of fact or a material omission that would be misleading to investors and making an investment decision relating to JEA securities. We like to kind of keep things light, and so, we just kind of say, don't be a problem that the SEC is trying to solve. Follow the policies and procedures that your senior leadership team has put in place. Be careful about political influence. This was something that we discussed in preparing the ADR or the annual disclosure report with the senior leadership team. Is just being mindful. There are a lot of facts and there are a lot of circumstances, but being mindful about what are the things that are truly relevant and material to investors, that are accurate and complete, and that JEA senior leadership team and officials believe is really relevant and material to JEA's credit story. And I think the final one is just being sensitive to the fact that investors really depend on you or JEA, the organization, to provide accurate and complete disclosure so that they can make informed investment decisions. And next slide. And John, if you want to pick up from here in terms of looking at things from the investor perspective, which is so critical in kind of simplifying this analysis.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa. Again, this is John Wilson. Melissa's talked about the SEC's engagement, and I've been doing this for 37 years, and the level of engagement that the SEC has had on the municipal market has been enhanced tremendously over the last few years, which is why we do a lot. We spend a lot of time doing these training sessions. But again, as Melissa noted, it really comes down to some very basic things in terms of managing your obligations under the federal securities laws. And it really comes back to the fact that you are being required to provide the investor information that is relevant and material to make a basic rational investment decision, the same as you would if you went to a bank to ask the bank to borrow money. You'd fill out an application and you'd give it you give the bank the basic information that they would need. And as Melissa noted, again, you don't need to skew it, so you don't need to sell. And as I think was presented in some of these financial numbers that you saw here, JEA's credit is very well established. JEA is a recognized name in the industry. So just focusing on providing the information as you know it, when you know it, and that's essentially the key to all of this. Next slide, please. So as a governing body, JEA's board has adopted some very good policies that require JEA to comply with all applicable securities laws and regulations, both in its primary offering documents as well as in connection with its continuing disclosure obligations. And we talked about Rule 15C212, which it does not apply directly to JEA, but any underwriter who places it wants to place JEA's securities into the market has required you to commit to provide continuing disclosure, and that's in the form of the annual disclosure report that Melissa mentioned, which we just recently worked with your senior leadership team to produce, as well as the offering document, which we talked about earlier, that we're just now starting to work with senior leadership to prepare, and which will be provided to you. So those policies and procedures are key to a program, a risk management program, in terms of anything involving the security law market. And as I said, with the enhanced focus by the SEC on the municipal market, we have spent a lot of time helping our disclosure clients develop, adopt, and implement disclosure policies and procedures, which are not the ones that people pull off the website of GFOA or the National Association of Bond Lawyers, but we craft those procedures to fit each issuer's particular situation and needs. And that, as Melissa mentioned, is a key point in any defense that we would have. And then under the securities laws is what's called a due diligence defense. And so if at any time the SEC would come calling, all JEA would have to do is provide the fact that it had these procedures in place, it followed those procedures, and was faithful to bringing forward the most accurate and complete information that we have. And we heard Sean East talk about data management. And in these days of media access, investors mine for information anywhere they can. Your job is to really bring forward that basic tenet of information. So these procedures that your senior leadership team has put in place is really, from what we've seen, and again, we do this around the country with a lot of issuers, they clearly are a best-in-class set of procedures which have been extremely effective in helping JEA regularly provide accurate, timely, and comprehensive information to investors. It has helped JEA manage communication with investors from an investor relations standpoint, both in the primary and secondary market. And most importantly, it has helped JEA comply with its obligations under the anti-fraud provisions. Next slide, please. One of I'm sorry, next slide, please. One of the key provisions that we always spend a lot of time with municipal entities is this concept of selective disclosure. That is becoming more and more of a challenge because of the various access to information that investors have and their thirst for information. So selective disclosure occurs when certain classes of investors are given access to what is referred to as non-public material information, while other investors are not given that information. So if an investor were to make a trade based on improperly disclosed material non-public information, that could be equivalent to insider trading, in that that investor would have an advantage over certain other investors, which then could create liability under the anti-fraud provisions. And that's why we spend so much time dealing with this issue, because there is a concept of fair disclosure in the SEC world that really requires the market, investors in the market, to have equal information and at the same time. So part of the challenge, again, is through these disclosure procedures to understand, as Melissa was talking about, when you are speaking to the market, what is material non-public information, when that's available. That's why we work closely with your senior leadership team, so that if for any reason that would happen, we would then be able to come in and provide a voluntary notice so that that information would be made available to other investors. So again, the key is understanding what it is and then reacting to that incident if it happens. Next slide, please. Another issue that we face a lot, and Melissa mentioned it earlier, is these public statements. The SEC has taken the position that the anti-fraud provisions apply to all statements made by an issuer that provides information which they deem to be reasonably expected to reach investors in the trading market. So any nature of information that we talk about, and we just ran through the rating agency presentation, while that was primarily for the board's benefit, that information is now in the public domain. So all of the information inside of that rating agency presentation has to meet those standards we talked about in terms of being accurate and complete and not omitting to state a material fact. So when you have the wide range of information that's routinely released to the public by an entity like JEA, both formally and informally, we have to admonish issuers and their governing body to the immense need to monitor the consistency and accuracy of all these public statements as they are being deemed to have reached the market and are being subject to the provisions of the anti-fraud requirement. Next slide, please. So here we talk about, again, how do you mitigate those concerns? You have to speak, and you have to address your constituency. You have to address city council members and investors. So there is, again, in your disclosure policies, provisions that we put into in terms of how we manage that information, so that as we speak consistently, we speak timely to all constituents, including investors. So because the fact that these statements are not published for purposes of informing the securities market does not alter the mandate that they not violate the anti-fraud provisions. So each and every time we speak, we have to make sure that these statements are evaluated to ensure that they don't contain any untrue statement of a material fact and comply with the anti-fraud provisions. Next slide, please. So this is a slide goes under the stating the obvious. Melissa touched on the issue of political influence. Again, because we travel the country, we see situations where information is released by folks that may not be part of the governing body, but we just ran into a situation with one of our clients where the mayor put out a statement as to what the financial impact of the COVID-19 pandemic is on the city, the affected city. Well, we were working with the CFO and his staff to wrap our minds around what that number would be and whether we were comfortable with that number, how accurate it would be. So those are the kinds of things that we run into, where different points of information are streamed out before they're really evaluated for their accuracy and completeness. So again, in order to mitigate the chances of violating the anti-fraud provisions, we really focus on disclosures released to the market that have to be evaluated for their completeness and accuracy and free of political influence. And I'm sure those of you who have been on the JEA board previously and other boards understand that. So again, it goes without saying. I'll turn it back to Melissa to close with some additional strategies around mitigating liability under the anti-fraud provisions.
Yeah, I think those are really strategies for mitigation for the organization, for JEA in general. And so what I'm going to focus on is strategies specific for the board members in terms of managing liability and under the anti-fraud provisions. And, the first, as I mentioned earlier, is really understanding the applicable federal securities laws that we've discussed today, and actions that may potentially violate such laws. And as I mentioned earlier, attached to the presentation is supplemental information. I would strongly encourage each of the board members to review that information. If they have any questions as it relates to anything in there that we may not have covered in detail here, to reach out to their senior leadership team, general counsel, disclosure counsel, and ask for clarity and guidance on anything that may be a question. The other is really consider whether your individual statements as a board member of JEA could be construed as public statements or selective disclosure made on behalf of JEA. The most important thing is making a reasonable delegation. It's really, really important for the board to be aware of the steps that the senior leadership team and staff are taking to ensure that all of their disclosure that's hitting the public market, whether it's in an offering document relating to the offer or sale of securities, annual disclosure report, voluntary notice, or even the information that's being posted on the JEA website, included in press releases, or other information that could make itself available in the public domain. And remember, issuers like JEA and their board members can rely on third-party consultants, but their reliance must be reasonable. And so really the way that I like to kind of frame that in terms of giving a realistic example is when disclosure documents are put before board members, they have a responsibility, according to the SEC, to read that information and form a basic understanding of it, of course, upon reliance on the senior leadership team, the information that they're giving them, asking questions and being informed. And next slide, please. It's really important for the board to remember that they are part of JEA's disclosure policies and procedures. And so the board is fortunate enough to get a near final product of the offering documents and the annual disclosure reports. And there is a tremendous amount of work that goes into preparing those documents by senior leadership and staff. And there are many, many, many things built into JEA's policies and procedures to help ensure that the information that's being brought forward is accurate and complete. There are multi-levels of review and things that have been done for years, really. It's nothing new to make sure that the authority is bringing forward the best information, what's most relevant and material for its investors. You know, one thing that is important to note is that each of the members of the board bring unique knowledge and unique perspective to significant facts and developments within JEA. And a lot of those facts are what are incorporated into JEA's offering documents, annual disclosure reports, and just public statements in general. And so make sure that you're engaged and ask questions and really understand what is going on, because that'll really help you do what we call the elephant in the room analysis, is to ensure that you're not aware of major trends or developments that may not be appropriately disclosed in any of JEA's disclosure documents. So if something is brought before you, is there something that just jumps out that is not included or may need to be revised so that it can be complete and accurate? I think on a more fundamental level, it's important just to have a big picture sense of what is that credit story that JEA is communicating to investors. As John mentioned earlier, the offering document or the official statement relating to the offering of bonds or securities is that credit application. It's how JEA is communicating its credit story to investors, and just having a general sense of what that story is. I think that the senior leadership team did a great job in bringing forward a lot of that credit story in the rating agency presentation. And so that's a tremendous resource for board members. And then, as I mentioned earlier, consulting with the senior leadership team, general counsel, your disclosure counsel, and other consultants regarding any questions or concerns that you have as it relates to anything in the disclosure documents or public statements that you're seeing is key. And as I mentioned earlier, really understanding the role and your responsibility as a board member is key. You're not responsible for everything. You don't have an obligation to do everything, but understanding your critical role in the success of JEA in managing and mitigating its liability under the anti-fraud laws is key. And I'm going to turn it over to Jean just to make any finishing or close, and then I believe we'll have a question and answer period.
Well, I will just close, Mr. Chair and board members, to thank you for your time, and we appreciate the opportunity here to just present to you these foundational principles of how the anti-fraud laws work and some of the phenomenal things that your senior leadership team has done to bring JEA to where it is today as really as a best-in-class operation from the standpoint of what the securities market looks at, the credit as well as the operational financial information that they provide. What we did, though, in the presentation that you have, as Melissa mentioned in the supplemental information, is provide you with what we call some desk reference materials that you can read at your leisure. I know you've been presented with a lot of information today, but as Melissa said, we stand ready to be available to you on any questions and any further information that you may need. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you all very much. We're in grave danger of running way over. My thought is that we would have a meeting soon, and that we would ask staff to put together a meeting within the next week or two and come back and look at items D, introduction to JEA financial statements, the monthly financials, item F. And Jody had suggested to me that she thought that the shade meeting was probably very dangerous in this kind of format, and that we should wait to do that until we're in person. I've talked to the lawyers, and I think that's perfectly safe as far as the development of the case to wait, hopefully only a month, but we'll see. But any problems with that? And does anybody have any hard deadlines where they have to leave? Bobby, you look like you're trying to talk. You must be on mute.
Yeah, there we go. John, my suggestion on the real estate is we, do another meeting this week, if possible, with the board as a whole and go through that, because I don't think we should rush that. That's just my suggestion.
I think
yeah, just remember, guys, we've got to notice the meeting. So I got to, what's our cycle for that?
Whatever the cycle is, I think we should do it. And I just think we should go through this headquarters building in an appropriate way. Just a suggestion.
I'd rather have another meeting properly noticed and dig deep into these remaining points rather than rush them as well.
Yeah, through the chair, this is Jody Brooks again, and to the board members, a special meeting can be called by the chair, and it requires no less than 2 working days from a notice perspective. And so if you are going to have a special meeting to talk about the building or the headquarters, we need to at least have a 2 working day notice if it's called by the chair, or 3 members of the board can call a special meeting.
I think the chair.
I would also agree. I think, there's a lot of information that we've been provided, and there's still a lot of information to go through. And rather than rush it, I would like to see us have another meeting to get through all of these important document items.
If that's the general feeling of the board, I couldn't agree more, and would ask that Jody, I don't know who is the appropriate person to poll the board, but to find out when people are available and set the meeting up as soon as is possible.
Yes, I'll work with Madrika Jones to make that happen, and we'll get a special meeting set. And it needs to be specific as to what the topic is, and the topic's going to be talking about the headquarters. Anything else for that special meeting?
It's the training. The JEA financial statements, the monthly financial statements. I've got a feeling there may be something else, but we'll keep going. I'm going to jump then to the establishment of committee. Jody has talked to a lot of you. I don't think she talked to Tom about what committees he wanted to be on, but what I'm suggesting is that we have 2 standing committees. One is the finance and audit. We did not get a lot of volunteers for that, surprisingly. Nobody ever wants to be on an audit committee, but Marty Lanahan was nice enough to volunteer to be chair. Bobby said he would be on it, and I would like to be on it. Is there anybody else that would like to be on the Finance and Audit Committee? You're welcome. Nobody volunteered. We need 3, and we've got 3. So hearing none, we'll stick with that. The nominating committee is the other standing committee. The bylaws lay out that it's the 2 past chairmen and the existing chairman, but since we've just gone through the nominating through Robert's Rules of Orders, we do not need to establish a nominating committee until January of 2021, and so I think we can defer doing that. A committee that I don't know whether you'd call it an ad hoc committee or it's not a standing committee is the Compensation and CEO Search Committee. I would love it if we could make that a committee of the whole of the board. I think it's the most important thing we have to do. But I also am aware that you all are very busy people, and that I don't want to overburden you, but I think this is really important. Marty, you had said you did not want to be on it, and I will honor that unless I can talk you out of it.
Well, no, to be clear, I'd said I'd rather be involved in the tail end. I do think we probably need a chair to go through the scoring. I think there's some things that somebody can do as opposed to the whole, but of course I defer to you on that, and I'll do whatever's needed. I know how time consuming this is, and COVID has changed the financial industry a little bit. So I'm going to be focusing on the bank, and I just want to make sure that we get the right process in place. And I'll do all the interviews you need me to do. I just wonder if one person should chair for process purposes.
Bobby Stein has agreed to chair, and let's have our first meeting of this group and have it be a committee of the whole, if we could, and maybe we can do it at the same time we do the board meeting next the next board meeting, so we're all together. And then I think you're right. We can slim it down to 3 people to do the interviewing and come back. We've had a governance and transparency committee in the past. I'm told that one of the main duties of that would be to review bylaws and policies. Melissa says that has not been done in a while, and so I would recommend once we have all worked together for a while that we establish that committee, but we don't do it right now. We've got too much other stuff on our plate right now. And there's a government, legal, and real estate committee, and I would suggest the same thing. I'm going to therefore go to the schedule of future board meetings. I think we've all been noticed. I have a conflict with the June board meeting, but if we're remote, I don't have a conflict. I'm just going to be out of town. If we're not remote, maybe Bobby can run the meeting and I'll call in if that's okay with you all. The next item is the procurement of executive recruiting firm. John McCarthy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. So I'm just going to briefly go over the work we've done to date on the solicitation and touch on our process and give you a good sense of timeline and the different steps that we go into making this a recommendation for the top-ranked firm. So in your board packets, the draft solicitation, and it's ready to go out to the executive recruiting firms to perform this recruitment. At some point, we request board review, provide feedback, particularly on the selection criteria, and approve the solicitation, which would start the process. Following your approval, we will use our informal procurement process, which takes approximately 3 weeks from the time a solicitation is published to the time an award recommendation is made. We have established points of contact at the executive recruiting firms and are confident there will be significant interest and participation from these companies and that they could turn around a quality proposal relatively quickly. Our process steps would be to first publish the solicitation and send it by email to the list of executive recruiting firms. We would then receive and score the written proposals and then conduct presentations with the shortlisted companies and determine the top-ranked company. The way the proposal is currently written, that step is an optional step that JEA could choose to do and most likely would if we followed past practices. So so 3 weeks, basically, from the time we get the okay to send it out to the time that we would be ready to make the award. And if we did not do that last step, it'd probably be 2 weeks. We could shave a week off. As mentioned earlier, if we follow past practices, one board member, we've done this will be our 3rd time since 2011. And the way we did it then, we had one board member that was designated as the evaluator and lead through the process, be supported by JEA staff, and make a recommendation to the full board on the top-ranked firm for approval. So in your board package is a 25-page document. That's the draft solicitation. In the back is a 2-page document that is the proposal form, which more concisely shows the selection criteria, a 2-page document. In its present form, there are 100 points allocated across 4 different selection criteria in equal weights. If presentations are conducted, another 50 to 100 points for the presentation would be appropriate, and is what we've done in the past. If Jason or there you go. So on these next 2 slides just has the 4 selection criteria with a high-level detail. Qualifications of the firm is 1. Search methodology is 1. And if you go to the next slide, qualifications of the proposed team, and then the fee structure. And right now, we've got them weighted equally at 25 points each for a total of 100 points. And if we did presentations, you would add an additional 50 to 100 points is what we've done in the past. And then the top, whichever company had the top number of points would be the top ranked company. And that's all I had to provide to the board today. I'm happy, of course, we'll welcome your feedback and happy to take any questions.
John, this is John Baker. My proposal is that when we meet again as a compensation and search committee as a whole, that you all go through the detail of the information that's been provided, and we can talk about it at that time, and then we can figure out who should be the person to grade the various search firms and where we go from there. Are there any objections to doing it that way?
I think it's great.
Okay, so we've worked ourselves into another meeting. Is there any old business?
John, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Just to be clear, have you given guidance for the team to send out the request for proposal, or are you wanting them to wait until you meet again as a committee of the whole to talk through the scoring that John just went through?
The latter.
Okay, thank you.
And Mr. Chair, can I just ask this question just for clarification? In our securing of the search firm, I just wanted some clarity with regard to what is it specifically that we are going to be securing the firm to do? Is that for them to come on and identify a new permanent leader, an interim leader? I'm just wanting to make sure that we have some clarification in terms of where we are in terms of how we expect whomever we bring on to move forward.
Well, certainly it would be the permanent leader. We can talk about other things in a minute. I've got something that would make that more relevant a little bit.
Okay.
Is there other new business? Okay, open discussion. This is important because we don't get to chat with each other about things often. And if there are things on your mind that you think we should be doing or things that you think we shouldn't be doing, this is the best time to bring it up.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Joe DeSalvo. Question for Melissa. Has JEA rejoined the Florida Municipal Electric Association?
Thanks for the question. We have expressed our interest in rejoining FMEA. In fact, Amy Zubley, who's the head of FMEA, was one of my first calls when I was appointed by the board as interim CEO. It's not solely our choice, though. It's also the choice of the board of FMEA, and what they have decided with us is to essentially make us a provisional member for now, give us accesses to the resources and the community of FMEA, but defer the vote of the board to bring us on as a full member until their July board meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa.
Welcome.
Mr. Chair, this is Dr. Haley. I know earlier we had some conversation about engaging the employees and doing sort of that type of assessment and understanding sort of their concerns. So I would just recommend that we think about how to do that, particularly we may still be on Zoom earlier rather than later. So as we go down the process of searching for a new CEO and leader, that we at least understand the sort of concerns of the employees.
I think that's a wonderful idea, and I would ask staff to come up with ideas of how we could do it. One thing I think that's very important is that to the extent, especially those of us that are new to JEA, I think it'd be great for us to set up times to go tour the facilities and just see firsthand what goes on. And obviously, we'd have a chance to talk to some of the people at those facilities at that time. But I think we need both the formal type of interaction with the employees, and maybe it's a town hall, as well as the informal of just, as they say, managing by walking around. I think it's really important, and I appreciate you bringing it up. I've got an issue that I want to bring up that I hate doing, but I think we as a board need to talk about whether we keep Melissa as the CEO, even though she's an interim CEO. It's my view, and it's just my view, that she was the president and COO during an administration so filled with improprieties that there is a certain degree of taint that's on her, whether warranted or unwarranted. I think that's made worse by the fact that the FBI has decided to dig in with a grand jury investigation of JEA and that past administration. The CEO is the face of JEA, and I don't think it is appropriate under these circumstances for her to leave that. And I think if we turned a blind eye to this issue, we would lose all credibility, certainly with the employees who would say it's just more of the same. And I think a lot with the citizens of Jacksonville. It may be more of a symbolic statement than it is anything else, but I think it's very important that we do it. It is important that JEA be run well, and she has done a good job. I would like for us to talk about, and I'd like to do it in a more formal way and just walk around the room and get the sense of the board about whether you all think I'm off base or whether you agree with me that it's something we need to do, even though it's very distasteful. Let me start off. Bobby, Stein, would you weigh in?
Yep. Yeah. So let me put it this way, John. I can tell you, since I've been involved with JEA this time around, Melissa has been fantastic. Her whole staff has been fantastic. The people, and I've been involved in 2 or 3 projects since my appointment intensively. And I've got to say, on the one hand, it's been fantastic working with Melissa. But John, I agree that we've got to stand up, and you make some good points, that we've got to show the community that we are making a new start. So, whatever we do, I think I can only say great things about Melissa, but I also think, on the other hand, that we have a fiduciary responsibility here to make a statement. So that's where I would come from, John, and follow your lead.
Marty?
Yeah, as difficult as this is, I think if you look within all of our business experiences from a leading companies or leading nonprofits or leading foundations, that the most likely next step would be to do this. And I hate saying that because Melissa and has done an amazing job onboarding me or re-onboarding me. But I think that the citizens and the ratepayers deserve to see us make a big statement of change. And I think that this would certainly prove that.
Joe?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I agree completely. And one, again, thank you for surfacing this. This is a tough discussion, but it's a necessary one. And it is the elephant in the room a little bit. Echo what Marty said, Melissa, you've been great onboarding and help facilitating getting established as a new board member, et cetera. That said, though, we do owe it, I think, to the JEA team and also the community to show that we're serious, as previously said, but then also recognize that we're holding those accountable. From what we know right now, realizing there's an ongoing investigation. And I think it's thoroughly appropriate to identify new leadership because we don't know what's going to happen as a result of the investigation, but it's just the right thing to do to show that we as board members, I believe, are showing that we are looking at righting this ship. So thank you.
Dr. Haley?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity. I would agree with a lot of what's already been said in terms of Melissa's professionalism with onboarding and helping to get me oriented, and the team has been really outstanding. I certainly recognize the issue that's at hand, and you're right, it is a little bit of the elephant in the room, and I do think it is probably the correct decision. But my only question would be around timing and how do we do that, particularly in the face of a search, and maybe I just don't know enough about the organization to know who would be an interim and how do you want to proceed down that pathway. But I do understand the issue around the community and the challenge before us and needing to make a statement.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. And again, I too appreciate your diplomatic surfacing of a very difficult issue. And all respect to Melissa, I haven't had a chance to get to know her well. I work closely with her. Certainly respect the opinion of my colleagues, but I feel it's the only responsible and prudent thing to do to make a change at this time. And like Dr. Haley, the process of finding the right next leader, I think, needs to be a very thorough and comprehensive and thoughtful process, and that clearly is going to take some amount of time. And so thought around interim leadership to stabilize things as we search then for the right next leader, I think needs to be discussion that we take up further. But I do think it's a responsible and prudent thing to do at this time to make a change. Thank you.
I talked to Jody about the issue of replacement, and the bylaws say that either the head of electricity or the CFO should be the immediate interim if the CEO is replaced.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry to correct. It's not the bylaws. It's the board governance manual that has a succession planning opportunity or succession planning. And when Paul had been the CEO, his successive planning was the head of the CFO and or the head of electric. And so that was the advice that I gave you yesterday, that maybe one of those two would be a good interim step.
Thank you for clarifying that. Let's come back to that. In addition, I think something we should consider at our next meeting. I was contacted by Paul McElroy, the former CEO of JEA, and some of you all might be not familiar with him, but he was very, very successful as the CEO of JEA and along with Melissa, largely responsible for bringing us into, the first in class organizations amongst our peers. I think he is someone he's willing to be an interim. He's not willing to be a candidate, but I think he would give us a steady captain of the ship during the coronavirus issues where we were working from home, and we really need somebody that knows their way around the organization. I think he would provide that. But I would leave that up to you all to interview him at our next meeting, and we will all make the decision together. There may be others that you all think should also be interviewed, and if you have others, I would appreciate you either bringing it up now, or if it comes to you later, contact Jody and ask her to arrange to have that person at our next meeting if it's possible. So what I would ask you all to do would be to consider a motion. A big issue, as you all recall from the Aaron Zahn saga, was that a lot of the senior leadership team now have contracts, and Melissa has a contract. And as you all recall, the way that Aaron Zahn was dealt with was he was put on administrative leave, and then the OGC did an investigation to determine whether or not he was to be terminated for cause. That took 4 weeks. It took a lot of time of the OGC staff, and it's a pretty brutal way of dealing with things. Very appropriate, I think. In that case, I don't think so appropriate in this case. I think Melissa, as we've all said, is incredibly competent. She has served for 8 years and made a real difference and added real value to JEA. And it would be my recommendation that she be terminated without cause. The other issue is there are consulting contracts in these contracts that would allow her to be a consultant for 6 months at full pay going forward. I'm not near as excited about that part of the contract as I am about making sure that Melissa gets the 20 weeks of pay that she has earned. And I would ask the OGC, if you all agree with this, to look into the consulting contracts, because honestly, they were an effort to get around the law, and I think they are probably not enforceable. But I do think her 20 weeks are well earned and deserved. And if the OGC does not feel like that we have a good case, then I would recommend that she get the consulting contract as well, because that's in her contract. So I'll entertain, those are my thoughts, but I'll entertain any motion any of you would like, or if you think I've made something very complicated out of something simple, we can get Jody to help us.
I think you captured it, John. Yeah.
Can I have an explication of what the triggers are in terms of determination, in terms of the contract itself, Mr. Chair? Is it my understanding that the two provisions that are there based upon what you shared are one, the potential for a 6-month consultancy, that's termination without cause, as well as 20 weeks of additional full pay. Are those the two, operational triggers that activate upon a termination without cause? Is that what, having not seen the actual contract that Melissa is under, I'm just wanting to clarify that those would be the two kind of outstanding obligations pursuant to the employment contract.
Is Sean Granite here?
He was earlier. Sean, you're unmuted.
And not wanting to belabor this, but I'd like to have an opportunity to see that and certainly get the input of OGC, Mr. Chair, as you shared in terms of the 6-month consultancy. I certainly don't want us to run afoul of something that may be there that would then cause us to have even a more litigious kind of engagement going forward. So
Sean is the employment lawyer for OGC, and that's I wanted him to speak to that if he could.
Sean, I don't know if you're trying to speak. If you are, you may have muted your phone because it looks like you're unmuted on the computer. Now you muted your computer.
Mr. Chairman, Joe DeSanto are waiting.
Mr. Chair, I think you're on mute. No?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just we're seeing if Sean Granite can come up on comms. Just the optic of maintaining the consultancy capacity, even in light of being terminated without cause, just sends a mixed message, and I think that's what we're discussing. I understand about the possible how much litigation is that involved. We have the flexibility to bypass the consulting part of that too on it, but again, we got to see what OGC says, but it just makes no sense at all to maintain somebody in a consulting capacity that we've deemed it's better to move on and terminate with cause. Just my thoughts. Thank you.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair, let me be clear. I don't necessarily disagree, but I also don't want us to get in a position, if OGC indicates where we're spending even more of our own JEA resources in defending something, if in fact it's a hard clad or we get the opinion that this is going to be difficult to get around, notwithstanding some of the purported nefarious nature in which some of those contracts arise. I just would like to get some direction from OGC. Either.
If Sean can't speak, Jody, why don't you speak?
Thank you. Through the chair to Dr. Faison, there's a provision in the site contract, it's provision 3.16, that if the JEA terminates Melissa without cause, it triggers this 3.1.6 provision that employees shall serve as a consultant to JEA for a period of 6 months in accordance with the terms of the separation agreement that was in a form attached as Exhibit A. And that is the provision that's being looked at by OGC. Research is being conducted on that provision as to whether or not that would be an enforceable provision in her contract. Currently, it's in there from a language perspective that she shall serve as a consultant for 6 months, but whether or not that is a circumvention of the 20-week severance is what's being debated in a research project, and hopefully we'll have a legal opinion on that in short order.
Mr. Chair, I believe, sorry, Jody, we have Sean now.
Okay.
Okay. Am I good now? Okay, thank you. Well, I think Jody just answered the question. One of the other questions was what are the benefits of Ms. Dyke's contract with a without cause termination? And one of the things that you need to know first, if the board decides to proceed without cause, there's a 30-day notice requirement. So the board would have to give Ms. Dykes 30 days notice before her termination without cause would take effect. That would, once her termination without cause took effect, it would include all of the amounts of payments that she's earned up to that date. She would also receive a lump sum of 20 weeks of her current salary. She would also become vested in any unvested contributions made to any employment retirement plans. She would also be entitled to 20 weeks of COBRA premium payments, which is the equivalent of JEA's contributions for healthcare plans for 20 weeks as well. And then there's the matter of the retention agreement, which is in Ms. Dyke's case, 6 months, that includes a mutual release. And as Ms. Brooks said, that's something that OGC is looking into, whether that's enforceable or not, the 6-month retention part.
Would you speak to the requirements of firing her for cause?
Yes. The contract that Ms. Dykes has is the same language that Mr. Zahns had. Cause is defined in this contract at a very high bar, and it explains, and I'll run through the different things that would qualify as cause. One is a willful breach of material duties that are not cured within 10 days after written notice that the board gives. So there's an opportunity to cure there. Another item that would reach cause is gross negligence or gross neglect of duties or willful misconduct. Another is continued violation of written rules and policies of the board after written notice is given. Another would be a conviction of a felony. Another would be theft or fraud or misappropriation of funds. And then another would be just carelessness or negligence to such a high degree that it approaches wrongful intent. And so conduct would have to be identified and would have to fit one of those items to be able and be proven to an arbitrator either through clear and convincing evidence or a preponderance, whichever standard the arbitrator decided to go with. In this case, the case of this contract, it's a very, very high bar.
One other question, Sean. We've got the city council investigating the administration. We have the FBI investigating them. If it came out that there was something that that was substantial enough to overcome that bar, could we at that point cancel the consulting clause?
The consulting clause itself contains a for-cause provision. And so if it turns out during the consulting period that cause exists, I think that we certainly could move to terminate the remainder of the consulting clause.
Mr. Chair, through the chair, if we got into the consulting period and that information was found out that we had enough there for a for-cause termination, could we seek remuneration of any of the consultant payments that might have been issued up until that point?
Sean?
That's a question that I couldn't answer right now. I think it would be fact dependent on what was discovered. It's certainly something that we would take a look at if that turns out to be the case.
Okay, does anybody want to make a motion?
I will move, this is Marty Lanahan, I will move that the JEA board thank Melissa for her service and onboarding up to this point of our involvement, but that we sever our relationship without cause based on what Sean just said, without cause, and we continue to await the OGC's answer on the legality of the contract that allows for consulting, but that we give Mrs. Dykes her 30-day notice at this juncture, and we await OGC's guidance on the other.
I'll second that.
Is there discussion? Let's do a raise your hand type vote, if we could, on this. Does everybody know how to do that? Or I could just
Chair, would you
do a
it might be better if you do a roll call vote.
Bobby Stein, how do you vote?
Yes.
Marty, you made the thing. How do you vote?
Yes.
Dr. Faison?
Yes.
General DeSilva?
Yes.
Dr. Haley?
Yes.
Tom?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well, with regret. Okay.
Mr. Chair, quickly, it does bring up the larger contract, and I'm glad we're going to be a committee of the whole on the compensation committee. It brings up the larger issue of the contracts that are out there. Can we make sure that that's an agenda item for our special meeting that will be noticed?
Absolutely. Jody was reading me the provisions of the contract this morning, and I think they're for 5 years, if you can believe it.
They're actually not. There is no end date on the contract itself, but the provision dealing with the consulting arrangement was for a 5-year term. So yeah, that provision is extended as a 5-year from the effective date of each of the contracts.
So I think it's very important that at the next meeting that we get OGC's decision on whether or not to pay the contract, and it would be great if we could all get a copy of that contract and read it and have you walk us through it at the next meeting.
Mr. Chair, there was a question submitted that because this was not an item on the agenda, will there be public comment?
Jody?
Yes, sir, because we did add it as a new item on the agenda. To an abundance of caution, you may want to go ahead and take public comment, even though action has already been taken. But if you'll indulge the public for any comments they want to make, now would probably be the best time to do it.
I think we should do that.
So at this time, like we had done previously, if you would like to make a public comment, please raise your hand and or mention that you would like to in the chat window. I will go with individuals in the Webex first before I go to phones. There is none from that. So the last phase, just to ensure that we are including everyone with equal opportunity, if you dialed in directly to the phone, if you can hit *6 on your phone, you can unmute yourself and mention that you would like to make a public comment. Please do so at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for allowing that to happen. There were no public comments at this time.
Thank you for bringing it up. Great idea. The next item on the agenda, and it will be the last since I don't have a chair report, is Melissa's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for letting me do this CEO report. Sorry, Jody, did you have a comment?
It's just that at some point we'll need to have an interim in your seat as to how to make that happen, even in the short run. If the your termination, there's a 30-day notice to it, but I believe it would be considered effective as of today. I just need clarification on that from the members, and if so, who would be the interim, and so we can have our special meeting.
Do we need to vote on that?
I would recommend it because of the from a bond market perspective and someone making sure that we have an identified CEO in that position, even though it's an interim status, until we can get someone selected at the next special meeting.
So, Jody, let me ask: Can I make a suggestion that we and the board gives John the ability to make that decision? Is that possible to do it that way?
That the board will give John the delegated authority to enter into some kind of an arrangement for an interim CEO prior to meeting?
Yes.
If that's the board's pleasure.
Can I make that motion?
I would second that.
Mr. Chairman, are you comfortable with making the decision and I can work with you on getting the interim put in place?
I'm very comfortable with that. I will tell the board that I'm going to recommend Karen Anders come on, and hopefully it won't be for a long time, but I would ask her to do it if she will, so that you know that. But I think it works better for you to delegate it to me in case there's some reason that you cannot do it.
I make the motion, give you the full authority to do that.
And Ms. Lanahan has seconded that motion. Any further discussion on that topic?
All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Melissa.
No problem. Important business. Thank you first to our board members for agreeing to serve our community through service on the JEA board. I would have enjoyed working with each of you. I'm grateful that your first action that was taken as a board was to address the JEA employees. Our employees have been through a lot over the past couple of years, and rather than focus on their own wounds, they've instead focused on consistently delivering excellence to our community, including supporting me as I led through this transition, and I know they'll support our next leader as well, and I'm grateful for that. The information that you received today is a reflection of the work of 2,000 people. Behind every spreadsheet, behind every metric, behind every page of every presentation is a JEA employee making this happen day in and day out. The 10 of us you heard from today get the privilege of sharing the story with you, but our story is the story of all 2,000 of us. Our employees are where you'll find JEA's heart of service for our community. They're employees like the ones who, when 15 of their coworkers in the warehouse were suddenly quarantined for 14 days, employees stepped up to make sure that support for our field employees didn't miss a single beat. The technology employees that are making this meeting possible today. The electric employees who worked through the night after storms last week to restore power to our neighbors. The water and wastewater employees who have balanced capital work with unexpected main breaks, and who are the recipients of the awards that we talked about earlier today, and that I hope they'll be celebrated for at next month's meeting. The meter services employees who are taking advantage of this pandemic to do work that otherwise would have interrupted our commercial customers in non-pandemic times. The energy audit group who's developed a way to perform virtual audits with some of our most vulnerable customers. The community and customer outreach employees who developed ways to continue to volunteer in a new virtual and socially distant world. The employees that have created and are creating programs to help both our commercial and residential customers through these challenging times. And the wastewater and lab employees taking influence samples to help advance coronavirus research. And these are just a few of our stories. I could not be more proud to be among a group of people that, when in the middle of a storm, rises up to provide what matters most to our community. Of all the metrics we talked about today, the one I'm most proud of is our commitment to safety. The excellent things that we have done been done safely, with the best safety record to date in JEA's entire history. One injury is one too many, and making sure every employee goes home safely each and every day will remain our most important priority. I am intensely proud of having had the privilege to lead JEA to this historic achievement. While leading JEA through this transition, I have fully cooperated with all investigations. In late 2019, I reached out to the state attorney's office and told it I was willing to assist in its investigation. In January, I did the same with the U.S. Department of Justice, the United States Attorney, and the FBI. I am proud that I have fulfilled that commitment without wavering. This will not change, and I thank those men and women for their professional, unbiased, and non-political investigation of the facts. As for me, I continue to be strongly guided by my faith, and I believe the last 2 years in some ways has been my own version of the parable of the flood. In that story, a man was trapped in his home during a flood and prays to God to rescue him. His neighbor urges him to leave and offers a ride in his pickup truck, but the man says he's waiting for God to rescue him. A boat then comes by to offer rescue, and finally a helicopter, and the man refuses them, waiting for God to rescue him. When the man gets to heaven and asks God why he didn't rescue him, God says, I sent you a pickup truck, a boat, and a helicopter. What else did you want me to do? When I was passed over for the interim CEO role more than 2 years ago, I passed on the pickup truck. And over the past couple of years, I've had plenty of moments that could have been my boat moments. But I'm on board the helicopter now, and I trust in God to guide my steps into the future. I wish all of my 2,000 teammates at JEA all the best into the future. You have so much to be proud of. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to give my last CEO report.
You're an amazing woman. We'll miss you.
Thank you.
Is there anything else to come before the board?
Mr. Chairman, I hate to do this, but from a clarity standpoint, there's the 30 days if we're terminating without cause, the 30-day notice period. So Melissa would be considered to be on administrative leave until that 30-day time is the date of their termination date. And in that interim period, I believe you had suggested that we put Karen Anders in the interim role until such time as we can have that special meeting. But I just want to clarify that Melissa is not, her termination date cannot precede that 30-day notice period, just
Okay.
so that we're all clear for the record.
We've got to do it the right way.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thanks all of you. A tough day, but I appreciate your service, and I appreciate you being nice enough to elect me as chairman, and I'll try to do my best. Thank you all so much. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.